Serious people who enter other people's homes as a part of your job, maintenance workers, etc. What's the weirdest thing you've seen inside someone's home? Used to work for a concrete company, and our mixer trucks would sometimes damage property. Typically my partner and I did maintenance on the plants, but we'd get sent to job sites to unfuck whatever the drivers did. So, while at one house, we had to tear up the driveway, replace the culvert and repair the end of the driveway. The first day we were there, all the old Snoopy neighbors were standing around watching us, and I had to piss pretty bad. So I asked the homie owner if I could use his bathroom. He said sure, and led me through his house, past a bathroom, into the bathroom in the master bedroom. Already creeped out by that. Oh, also I noticed cameras all over the place. Some pointed out windows, some pointed into the rooms. Creep factor leveled up point. So he leads me to the bathroom, opens the door and holds it for me, like you would at a store, when someone is behind you. I say thanks. He still stands there. I had to walk past him and yank the door closed point while leaving. I notice a bedroom decked out in kid stuff. This would normally not toss up any flags. Grandkids room probably, right? But with all the added creepiness, it just didn't seem normal at all. Told my partner. He laughed and pointed out there was probably cameras in the bathroom point. If either of us had to piss after that, we drove down to the gas station. Edit time for clarification. So this was around 15 years ago. We are talking camcorders on tripods, not your cutesy nanny cams. Old guy was single, and this wasn't a very kid-friendly setup as far as foster homes go. The part about him holding the door for the bathroom, imagine going to a restaurant, and there's a group of people with you, and you hold the door open for them. This was what I was talking about. Except he didn't seem to have any intentions on closing it, hence me snatching it from him. Back in the early 90s, I worked for a company that removed old electric water heaters and replaced them with propane-powered water heaters. Because propane water heaters can possibly spew carbon monoxide, there are state regulations as to where the water heaters can and can't be placed. So it was my job to inspect the water heater room and draw up plans for ventilation, if necessary. I showed up at a client's home to inspect the area where he had his water heater to see if we needed to install any vents. When I asked to see his current water heater, he seemed a little uncomfortable and said, "I have something in the room that I forgot to clean up." I followed him to the room, and when he opened the door, the smell of weed hit me. In the water heater room, he had fishing lines strung up with trimmed plants being dried. If I were to guess, there must have been a couple pounds of weed drying in there. He said, "Oops, sorry about that." I smiled and told him, "No problem. I don't even know what that is." I knew exactly what it was, but I didn't want the guy to get worried about me telling someone. He offered me some, but I told him, "No thanks. I don't know what that is." As I was leaving, he asked me, "You aren't going to tell anyone about the plants, are you?" I asked, "What plants?" The guy smiled, then said, "You sure you don't want some?" I definitely wanted some, but I was still pretty new at my job, so I didn't want to take the chance that accepting weed from him would blow up in my face. Before I left, I told him, "Make sure you clear that closet before our guys arrive. They might not be happy about the plants I didn't see." I used to install smoke alarms for the hearing impaired, 50% elderly and 50% deaf, all over the state of Oklahoma. I would get addresses for the installations the week before and plan routes accordingly, meaning I would just put the addresses into Google and check out the Earth/map views. This place I'm thinking of was in the middle of nowhere, which is saying something considering that the entire state of Oklahoma is in the middle of nowhere. When my ASL interpreter and I made the trip, we had to ramp our minivan over a nearly washed out bridge, bounce down a forest road, and choose which of 3 broken down trailers these people were using as shelter. Looking back, we really should have just called it before ramping the bridge. Once there, we met the people and they explained, in ASL through my interpreter, that they had a tornado rip through their home that ended up sparking a fire somehow. That explanation never made it through translation. Since then they had decided to be more fire safety conscious, which I applaud, but their home had holes in the roof the size of people. One wall was just a tapestry of duct tape trash bags. I didn't feel right just installing fancy smoke alarms when they clearly needed much more help, but there wasn't anything I could do point. So I'm doing the only thing I can do, installing smoke alarms, explaining basic fire safety, teaching them to use their bed shaking devices. These folks were deaf, and when I start to explain that they should exit the home without stopping to grab anything including pets, they stop me and explain that their pet is very valuable. As in it had a monetary value point. I'm not one to pry, so I took this at face value and reiterated the importance of leaving the home immediately if it is on fire, especially because it's a trailer home. They had a long silent conversation with my interpreter during which she looked more and more concerned. The occupants go into a room I hadn't yet entered and emerge with a faking bald eagle on a leash. Sheets illegal yo. I worked at 2 different property preservation companies from about 2006 to 2017. Most properties were single family homes that were foreclosures. I never went to houses. I looked at photos our contractors took. Highlights. Jabba the poo. A toilet had broken. Why fix it? Let's put a tarp down around the toilet and poo on the toilet pile until it's like 2 feet high. Deer massacre. Don't know what happened at that house, but there was a trench at least 20 to 30 feet long and 3 to 5 feet wide filled with whole and partial deer corpses. Cow bathroom. A cow got into a vacant property, ate a lot of the baseboards and stairs, and then got in a bathroom and closed the door on itself. I guess the door was strong because it was found a month or 2 later, decayed into the floor. Puddle cats. I think with the above story I hopefully do not need to elaborate on that term. They are so common we use that term in the office. The cage. There was a freaking jail cell built into the corner of the garage in a house in a crappy neighborhood. I had lived 1 street over a year earlier. We came to the conclusion it probably was related to human smuggling because we never heard on the news about a serial killer or anything. Fancy house. This was a 32, I think, room mansion that was seized by some government agency and then sold to an investor. Local kids wrecked the place at least once a month. There must have been $100K damage the last time I saw photos from their stripper room. A doomsday prepper house that had a sign warning of booby traps had a 600 ISHA QFT building that was not permitted on the property. It was accessed by driving over a creek if it hadn't rained too much and wasn't on any paperwork for the property. It had 3 couches, a stripper pole, and CDs on the wall. For a disco ball effect I think. Meticulously stolen cheap sheet. Several houses had all the light switch covers, outlet covers, tiny stuff like that stolen. I get stealing pipes to sell for scrap, but who is buying second-hand switch covers? I know I have a lot more weird ones. We'll try to remember. It wasn't part of my job, generic it guy, but I was once ordered by the CEO/owner of the small company I worked for to go to his house and install his cable and internet. The following things happened. His beauty queen wife, early 40s, lots of surgeries, met me at the door in her bathrobe, but reasonable nightwear underneath. She and her husband were in the middle of a divorce, and she was a little drunk at 10 AM, which was normal according to the office gossip. She flirted with me a couple times, but I'm not much to look at, so I think she sobered up enough to pass. That makes me feel sad thinking about it. I entered the room, where his son keeps all his shit. This was the late 2000s, and he had every gadget, and expensive thing a teenage boy, 18-ish, could want. The place was a faking mess with stuff I couldn't afford, but that he had carelessly thrown about. His 15-year-old daughter was passed out drunk on the couch of the living room. She had a half-empty bottle of wine on the floor and a blank over her face. Like her mother, she too had a known, gossip, drinking problem. I ended up connecting everything, setting up the wireless, and calling the cable company. It took me about 2 hours to complete, but I felt so dirty being in that house, and not being able to unsee what happens when horrible people get a lot of money. By far the weirdest dude I've ever helped was this bodybuilder who was having a bunch of home theater shit installed in his house. He absolutely would not use Wi-Fi because he believed it was dangerous and wanted everything in the house wired, so there were 4 of us on this job. We get there and he takes us to the basement and there are signs up all over about radiation and to wear eye protection when certain equipment was running. Dude has a tanning bed and a bunch of chemicals that I can only assume were for making steroids or something of that sort. But remember that Wi-Fi is dangerous. Oh, also a vibrator, but honestly that's just not even on our radar at this point. Later, he asks if we mind if he goes on a walk and we're like sure man, do whatever, and about 10 minutes later we realize he's naked in a field behind his house doing take-eye. Dude has neighbors, he is not that far away from people to be doing that. Towards the end of the appointment, we are setting up an account for something, and he needs to create a password. He decides to ask me how my name is spelled and use my name as his password. My name is not unusual, but it is a name that can be spelled many ways, so I'm sure that worked super well for him. We finally finish and are just about to get the fuck out of this place when he suddenly darts out of the house and waves us down. He apparently has a tradition of letting guests choose a marble from a table filled with marbles. We all pick a marble just to appease him. He tells me I can have a second one if I like. I declined on account of not wanting to make my coworkers jealous. Parole officer here. I supervise parolees in one of the worst areas in North Philadelphia. I've seen my fair share of weird crazy stuff, but this one takes the cake point. So a few months ago I entered a home in which one of my parolees was requesting to live. Each home has to be approved by parole staff. It must search top bottom for anything that could possibly set up red flags or become a violation of parole. So I entered this home, and the first thing that stood out was the intense smell of chemicals. I mean, it was so intense the smell hit me like a train. As I walked inside there was a large 10-gallon trash can, multiple boxes and various other trash cans all completely filled with empty bottles, Clorox, CLR, and other cleaners. All the furniture in the room was moved towards the walls. There were 3 large dog crates all stacked up in the kitchen, as well as a very expensive dog treadmill. Hanging on the banister to the staircase was bolt cutters, chains of all sizes, as well as multiple dog collars. There were also container upon container full of dog food, and multiple pallets of wet dog food. As I proceeded up the staircase there were large claw marks going all the way up the stairwell, and something that closely resembled blood splatter. The list literally goes on from there, but you get the gist. I fully believe I walked in on a dog fighting ring. Extremely sad. Also in the backyard were also 2 bull terriers chained up. And don't worry, I did report my findings to the SPCA. This was the first time I went into my ex-wife's house. She lived with her grandmother at the time when we first started dating. As I go in nervous about meeting everyone for the first time, she leaves me in the living room and I just start hearing screaming. Nothing intelligible, just random screams and moans. At first I thought someone was messing with me, but all I could tell was it was a man's voice coming from the hallway next to the entrance I came through, and my ex went upstairs. 20 minutes of this, I get up to, since I'm getting more anxious and the yelling never really stopped. Not really aware of what I was getting myself into. Start to go closer to the entrance to at least step outside. I didn't want to make any noise, since I didn't know anyone, and I was getting closer to the yelling. Didn't want to disturb anything or anyone. Just kept getting creepier with no other noises except the yelling, and not being prepped for any of this. Of course I make it to the door, look down the hall where the yelling is coming from when, boom, a little old lady behind asks what I'm doing. She must have noticed I jumped, since she chuckled and asked if I wanted to go meet him. No one explained who this guy was, or who anyone was. I figured it must have been her grandmother talking to me. Didn't want to be disrespectful, so I just agreed. I know, stupid move. Turns out to be my ex's uncle who was in an accident a few years back. He had permanent brain damage and was stuck in a bed with no real way to communicate with anyone except through the moans and screams. It was one interesting way to meet the family. Went to the house one more time before I got divorced. TLDR, left in a creepy old house by myself with screams coming from where I just came. Former cable guy here, and oh boy, I have some stories. The one I always remember is the lady who told me she had called us 5 times and the previous 4 techs could not complete her install, so this time she wanted me to install it in a way that did not encompass the basement. That didn't seem good. Well, I tried, but essentially her drop came up from the ground, and literally the only way I could hook her up was to go into the basement, install a splitter, and pick up her network throughout the rest of the house. I told her this, and she sighed and said, well, I guess this isn't happening. At this point I was morbidly curious and a little worried, so I told her I at least had to try, or else my boss would be mad. Surprisingly, she agreed to let me try, but said there was no way it could be done. She leads me to the basement door, and opens it, and turns the light on. Right away I understood. Stacked on literally every inch of her floor, and including 2/3 of the stairs, were magazines, newspapers, and other assorted papers. They were stacked literally floor to ceiling. It wasn't like a giant stack here, and a giant stack there, and lots of little stacks all over the place. Literally floor to ceiling stacks of papers, magazines, etc. covering literally every inch of floor and 2/3 of the stairs. I went down the 1/3 of the stairs I could access with my eyes above the level of the ceiling, and shined my flashlight through a small space created by a steel beam and a rafter too small for the stacks near the ceiling, and it went all the way to the wall in both directions. It was as if her basement was filled up like a bathtub, only with paper. Unreal. Point. She told me that she just had a hard time throwing any of it away and was planning to read it someday. I apologized for not hooking her up and quickly left. I used to babysit for a family friend. He had begun to take a lot more hours of work, so he didn't have much time to do housework. He asked me if I could do it for some extra money. I said sure. One day, while I was doing his laundry, I found 2 girdles. They were like those after pregnancy ones, that were like a tank top with 2 ace bandage type things that stretched and velcroed across each other, across the stomach. I thought must be one of his girlfriends. He was a single dad. He ended up seeing I did the whites, they were white, and asked me if I put the whites in the dryer. I told him everything but the tank top things. I didn't want the velcro catching on anything. He looked shocked and embarrassed. Then, a few months later, I found a large bra with silicone type inserts. Then I definitely thought, oh, he must be seeing someone. It just made sense to me. I told my mom about it thinking maybe she knew about his girlfriend. She laughed and said that she didn't know if he was seeing anyone. Maybe someone he hooked up with left it. A bit later my mom said that the girdles were his and he had confessed to her about them. He said he was embarrassed by his weight and the girdles made him feel skinnier. I believed it. I asked my mom if she pressed him on the bra with the fake boobs. She said she didn't and was waiting to see if he'd bring it up. My brother and his son were friends and my brother came with me once. They were looking for an adapter for something, I think a controller my brother had for the Xbox 360, and they dug in his closet. He found huge heels in the very back of the closest buried under a huge duffel bag. They were like drag queen heels. I then began to realize, maybe this guy liked to dress up. Then I remembered the wigs I saw in his room once and just thought they were his mom's. She has alopecia, because they looked like her style and I'd seen some similar at her house. I also knew he'd take them to an ex of his to get them washed and styled. And it clicked. Never looked at him the same again, in a good way. He's a really cool and funny guy. And just learning about that made me wish he'd be free to open up. I'd love to see him all dressed up once. Living as a single dad in the South is hard enough already, so I'm sure he's not too keen on letting that persona out. I used to own a company that set up and maintained large fish tanks. I had 53 clients from all walks of life and most of them were typical. Knock, go in, clean the tank, provide an invoice, get paid and leave. I got a new client one day from my roommate. He said that this woman had a large reef tank and needed someone to maintain it. I call her up, we discuss her tank, the basics and set a time for me to stop over and have a look at her setup. The day comes, I'm standing on her front porch, ring the doorbell and wait, and wait, and wait. Right about the time I turn around to leave, the door opens to an empty room. After about 20 seconds she appears from behind the door, completely nude except for her chucks, and asks me to come in. It's a second floor condo and upon entering, I notice a complete lack of expected furniture anywhere. There's a large bougainvillea on a giant trellis in what should be the dining room and that's about it. The fish tank is in her living room and it's the only piece of furniture visible from the foyer. I do my best to maintain eye contact while talking with her, but she's both attractive and covered in tattoos, so I'm kind of struggling. She goes into her bedroom while I'm cleaning the tank. When I'm done, I call out to her to let her know that I'm finished. She says that I'll find what I need in the kitchen. I walk into the kitchen to find several neat stacks of money on the counter, a dorm fridge on the counter, and one of those tiny as microwaves, slightly bigger than an easy bake oven, on the other counter next to stacks of money. There had to be $15k in cash on the kitchen counter. I take the cash to cover the service and place it with the invoice, and wait next to the bougainvillea in silence for what felt like 15 minutes, until she comes out. I show her the invoice and the cash. She smiles, thanks me, and I leave. She was one of my clients for almost a year, and never once did she have clothes on when I showed up. Maintenance worker for realty and non-profit companies, locksmith LLC supervisor/clerk, foundation repair tech, and ex-cable installer with 12 years experience. I found adult toys, spicy undergarments, sex rec rooms, drugs, piles of cash, strange hidden cameras, syringes and burnt spoons and other paraphernalia, etc. There's one guy whose apartment is covered in unicorn memorabilia, including meat containers in various languages, scented candles, posters, and paintings. This guy's my personal hero, going by weirdness level. I've walked in on naked personal friends and strangers in a small orgy, been held at gunpoint, taken down at least one human trafficking case, and worked in houses where there obviously is a latchkey kid or kids hiding alone in a bedroom closet, so you have to audibly announce your every move without finding them, and trying not to freak them out too much. I've encountered numerous poorly trained pit bulls/Dobermans, temperamental Malamutes, barking Labrador mixes, viscous ankle-biting Terroirs, and escape artist kitties. Most of them can be chilled with a few diabetes and allergy-safe treats in 5 minutes with a laser pointer. I wear anti-rip cotton mesh over chainmail and steel toe boots in some of these situations. I've never let a pet escape. I've received 2 complaints in 11 years, both of which nobody took seriously, and I've been denied entry 4 times, once by a babysitter who appeared to be a random, homeless, psychologically challenged senile person with 2 large sons, and 3 times by the same housekeeper who seriously should recognize me by now. The worst things I've encountered in my jobs are a 3-way tie. Once, we were called to an unlicensed daycare in a rental home, because all 3 toilets were clogged and full of overflowing feces. There were diapers and food waste scattered across the first floor, and dozens of feral cats running amok between babies that had been sitting for hours in car seats on the floor and school-aged children who were not in school, but seemed to be providing rudimentary care to the babies. The foyer, where people dropped kids off, was neat and clean, with several obviously forged accolades hung on the walls. When I asked, every adult claimed not to work there or be associated with the place. I had to wait nearly 7 hours for a representative from Child Protective Services to show up, who took notes and left the place as is. I called the department once per day until the building was finally shut down over a week later. A room for rent situation, in which a hoarder had worked for a pizza restaurant and hoarded half-eaten pizzas and garlic sauce in boxes, piled floor to ceiling along the walls around 2 large bedrooms. There were also samples of human feces stored in 1-quart drinking containers sealed with plastic wrap, and 8 GB thumb drives with various different child pornography and other violently disgusting videos hidden in seemingly random pizza boxes. After the police cleared the area, we had to dispose of almost 1,000 boxes, and I couldn't eat pizza again for 2 years. Any situation involving obvious pet abuse resulting in death, parvovirus dogs locked in garages, or neglect/abuse/intentional or accidental killing/suicide of people. Basically, if my gut reaction is to make an excuse to go out to my work truck and secretly grab a camera or notify authorities, it's not going to be a great day. I worked as a removalist whilst at college. Pre-mobile phones, with cameras, being common, we moved the house furniture etc. For an attractive female bank manager, well-dressed, immaculate makeup and confidence. She was married with 2 kids, but still very fit, probably mid-30s. We were around 19 or 20 y.0. We were there all day packing the truck, and she kept asking us if we wanted food, drink, etc. She also asked if we had moved the main bedroom stuff, and more importantly, she kept mentioning the bedside tables and to be careful moving them, etc. Not unusual, we hadn't got to that room, but eventually she and the husband/kids left in their car for the big trip to their new house. 4 hours away, we continued to pack the truck, ready to follow them later in the day. My mate and I got to the main bedroom. We had honestly forgotten her conversation from earlier. We moved the bedside tables, and under the tables, on the carpet, are a pile of naked photos of the bank manager in many solo erotic positions, high quality professional photos on large photo paper, taken by an SLR camera I reckon. We had a quick look through, so our boss, who was in the truck waiting for furniture, did not question us. Our hearts were pounding. She came across as a high-powered executive type woman, but these photos showed another side. The unpack at the new house was awkward/sexy/arousing/a range of emotions. For young 19-year-olds, we didn't know where to look, so we just avoided eye contact for the whole unpack. She was talking to us and being super friendly. On reflection, she clearly wanted us to see the photos, and I look back now, as a now 40-plus-year-old, and honestly believe she wanted removalist sex from 2 young lads, but we were too naive to realize it, or probably scared she would have eaten us alive in the bedroom. Free-range guinea pigs. I do furniture assembly as a side hustle and find myself in all kinds of people's homes. This one time I showed up at this sketchy apartment in a rough part of town to build a desk for a girl that was referred to me by a past client. They made me wait at the door for a few minutes after arriving, which had me uneasy since I was already in a bad neighborhood. Then she opened the door and I was taken aback since she was wearing a full-on niqab. Just wasn't expecting to see that, and it sort of threw me for a loop. So there I was in this small, quiet, sparsely decorated apartment, and she says the desk is right here. You just put it together in the living room. And out of the corner of my eye another woman in a niqab walks from one room to another, and I'm sorry, but it was almost like seeing a ghostly apparition. But they were really nice and offered me tea while I worked, so that put me at ease. Anyways, while I set to work putting together this IKEA desk on their living room floor, I spotted some movement out of my peripheral and just assumed it was maybe a kitten. But then I saw it again, and it was way too small and scampered weird, so then I wasn't sure what I was seeing. A few moments later, I see another pop its head out from under the couch, and sure enough it was a cute little guinea pig. Now those things are adorable, but as far as I've ever seen them, they're always kept in enclosures. But no, there were at least 3 that I saw just roaming around the apartment at their own leisure. And yes, that's when I noticed leaves of lettuce and pellets just strewn about on the floor, and little droppings in the corner. I mean, these people weren't really living in squalor or anything, just a very different lifestyle than what I'm used to seeing. Again, they were super nice and did pay me more than requested, but it definitely remains one of the stranger jobs I've done. Finally, the post I've been waiting for. Lol. My first construction job out of high school was working for a company that built homes almost exclusively for the insanely rich in Minneapolis. I only worked for them for a year and a half, but the owner was my grandpa's best friend, so I got to go to a lot of his odd job calls instead of just being stuck on the same site all the time. I saw more weird shit in that year and a half than I have in the 20 years since. One house had an Indian burial mound next to the house, huge plates cut from a battleship as yard art, a miniature greyhound selective bred down to the size of Pomeranian, a Tin Man statue with a huge stovepipe dick, and a Running Man statue with a bunch of legs with tennis shoes on them, and a fake rubber bussy on the back. Another house we were building had been purchased by the owner sight unseen. He was on a yacht in the Mediterranean and bought it. He sent my boss to look at it, and my boss told him it would be cheaper to test it down and start over, which we did. We had been building the new house for over a year when the owner finally showed up to look at it. He pulled up in a classic Porsche with a drink in his hand looking like Hunter S. Thompson. He was actually very nice to us and offered to let me drive his Porsche. The house was like something you'd see on MTV Cribs. 3 stories, lots of huge rooms, beautiful staircases, movie theater in the basement, etc. He walked through the house pretty quickly, then told my boss it's a nice play. Hope the beach likes it. He was divorcing his wife and had to build her a house as part of the settlement. He never set foot on that job site again and paid my boss in full when the house was finished. Another house had a periscope window because they wanted a window there but didn't want to look at the neighbor's house. The periscope let them enjoy a view of the lake on a side of the house that didn't actually face the lake. That was the Kendatum house, which was an architectural award winner with all sorts of cool shit, but that periscope window was probably the coolest part. I got to help hang a Newman in their kitchen and then chill with Kendatum and drink lemonade and talk about libraries and museums. Another job was installing an extremely expensive dishwasher into an apartment downtown. The owner was a third-generation ultra-wealthy douchebag heroin addict who looked like Gollum, chain-smoked cigarettes the whole day, and flipped between threatening to kill us and bragging about how great he could fuck us. When the affluenza kid ran over those people and the story hit the news, I instantly thought of that guy. His entire career was to donate family money to charity. I also worked on a house owned by a guy who traveled in an armored RV and wouldn't come to the site. We had to deal with him through a proxy. We restored the house to match paintings of it from the 20s and 30s. On another job, we worked next to some very beautiful nudists who were always outside. That made for a nice day at work. Late to the game, but have to share. I'm a delivery driver. Typically we just bring food to the front door. Ever so often we will get a request to come inside, typically because the person is disabled. You may choose to accept this request or just call and tell them no. We'd never had any issues and typically people are grateful and tip well when we do come in. So, we get an order. Customer says they are in a wheelchair, gives us the code for their garage for entry. My coworker says she's up for it. Off she goes. 10 minutes later I get a call from her. She's freaking out saying the place was creepy as fuck. The garage that she's entered had dismantled dolls all over, large lifelike dolls sitting in chairs, and clutter all over making it difficult to walk through. She's about to open out when she hears a voice from inside that says, "I'm back here." I have no idea why, but she followed the voice, but turned the camera on her phone just in case something crazy happened. Yes, I know that really doesn't make a lick of sense, but it's what she did, and started taking random pictures of the place. She goes through this horrible hoarder house making her way to the voice. When she gets to the bedroom, a man is there, dressed only in a, what she called, toilet paper diaper. She drops the food near the bedroom door and averts eye contact and goes to leave. She told management, but the dick of a boss told her to continue delivering there. Few days later we get another order. This time her and I refused to take it. A man I work with went for it. Apparently, on his trip to the horror house, the man told him to bend over in front of him if he wanted a tip. We went above the dick boss at that point and got the guy banned by corporate. Dick boss was actually fired a month or so later. So thankfully we have management that trusts our judgment now. Oh hell yeah, I finally get to tell this story. So first thing, my dad has a painting business and hasn't ever since I was 10 I've been helping him as an unofficial employee, and because of this, we get a lot. If high-end employers were talking about multi-million-dollar houses here, and with that comes a lot of moving sheet around to get painting ready, so that's what we do. It's just a regular Saturday and we seem to do everything normal. And then comes the time to move some pots lying around in a living room. So I grab a pot thinking nothing of it, but as I move it, I notice a small metallic shimmer at the bottom of this flower pot. So I grab it to see what it is, and lo and behold, it's a fully loaded Beretta pistol in the flower pot. Now this is as we're talking about, so it is primarily conservative, so at this point I'm used to moving people's guns, but I was just so taken aback by this. As a teen. And it doesn't end there. I looked around the house for more pots, and guess what, more guns. It was like 25 guns total. I later find out this guy is a real gun nut, so much so that a vault we had to paint had over 100 guns and enough ammunition to survive the apocalypse. He was a nice guy and even gave me an ammo necklace that I sadly lost a year ago. 7.62 for anyone wondering. We even talked about our personal fav rifles. I used to accompany staff to people's homes when they had to have a home visit for their WCA to allow them to get or continue getting ESA point personal information and names changed for obvious reasons. WCA equals Work Capability Assessment, the test used by the Department for Work and Pensions to see if someone is eligible for ESA point. ESA equals Employment and Support Allowance, disability benefit you get in the UK if you have a health condition or a disability that affects how much you can work. We are called to a lady's house that is unable to get to an assessment center due to her disability. There is a lockbox and a phone number. We have to call her social worker for the code. She tells us the lady inside is very poorly and to speak quietly. We've read the case notes. She is 36 and has schizophrenia. What they don't tell us is how severe she has it. So we get the code and open the door and walk in and say hello, Miss Smith, and she appears in the doorway of the kitchen and screams loud. The type of scream you'd expect from someone who was petrified. Her eyes are swollen and red. She's completely naked and is bleeding from parts of her body. The screaming stops and she softly and quietly says, "You need to leave right now." My colleague is ready to leave, but we have to call the social worker again to get advice. Then she changes her tone and invites us into the kitchen for a sweet tea. So we go in, and really at this point we want to get a quick form filled out and get the hell out of there. On paper, plates all over the kitchen worktops, and the table is skin she has pulled off and measured because she has written the measurements on the plates. This is why she's bleeding. My colleague just leaves. She doesn't say a word, but I just see her turn and go, and then hear the front door open and close. I ask Miss Smith if she needs any help and she says no, but look at this, and she picks up a plate with a piece of hairy skin and 3.8 centimeters written next to it. I say I'm just going to make a call and go outside. My colleague has clearly been sick. I call the social worker and tell her what's happened, and she says, "Oh, again." Miss Smith was eventually sent to a specialized hospital for the mentally ill. I've seen some shit in that job, I tell you. Most of it I'd rather forget. I worked as a home health nurse for many years and saw lots of weird stuff, but this one tops them all. It was a new case for the agency. I was told the patient was a quadriplegic in his 30s. He lived with his girlfriend, her teenage son, and a dog. He was pretty much taken care of by his girlfriend, but needed help transferring from bed to wheelchair, etc. I got there, and son let me in. I went upstairs and met my patient. He was laying on a mattress on the floor with the GF. I could smell urine. I asked if he wanted me to get him cleaned up. GF said, "Not yet. We will call you when he is ready." I went downstairs to start cleaning the trash pit of the kitchen. The bedroom door was open, and at the top of a short 4 to 5 step staircase. It was in plain view of the living room and kitchen. I hear noises over the water running where I'm doing dishes, so I head upstairs thinking they are calling me. Remember, the bed was wet with urine that they were both sleeping in. I see the GF on top of the guy, riding him hard. I'm all for consenting adults to have a sexual relationship, but could you at least shut the door? I go back down to finish the dishes. Then I hear my name called for real. GF is climbing off him and says, "You can clean him up now, and the sheets need to be changed." I stood there with my jaw on the ground. How presumptuous. Really? I got a towel around him, put him in his chair, and changed the bed. GF was in the shower, so he had to wait. While waiting, he asked me to feed the dog. I went to the basement where the dog and teenager lived. I opened the door calling the kid's name since I still had not met the dog. The room reeked of dog shit, teenage funk, moldy food and pot. A 100-pound German Shepherd came running at me. I ran to the stairs and slammed the door. The dog was snarling and tearing at the door. Nope. I refuse to deal with the dog. I get upstairs and GF has put patient back on the now clean bed and is riding him again. I continue cleaning the kitchen and hear my name. The bed is urine soaked again, and again I'm directed to clean him and the bed. Instead, I go downstairs and call my agency. I did not feel safe in the house because of the dog, and I felt like I was cleaning at a hoe house. The supervisor showed up to relieve me, and I went home. She called me an hour later telling me she was cancelling their contract with the patient, and the majority of the urine in the bed was the GF's. Ugh. Some people just have no respect for anyone. I can't make this shit up. Home inspector here with 2 stories. 1. Years back I was inspecting an 8-plex for an investor. Realtor representing the buyer was a former federal prosecutor that's had a change of mind in careers. This was a low-income housing Section 8 housing. Most units were very clean and occupied by hard-working immigrant families, but one unit I was warned about. The realtor, the buyer, and I head in, and the second we enter the smell hits us. Garbage piled about 2 feet high everywhere with trails running through to make way to bedrooms and the bathroom. Such toys, porn, and drug paraphernalia laying out in the open with toddler toys and high chairs nearby with rotting food laying around. Realtor immediately goes into federal prosecutor mode and starts taking pics, then calls 911 to report. We write this unit off as a total redo and leave. As we are walking away, the tenant approaches the buyer and says to him that she's had non-stop ant issues no matter how much she cleans. Buyer tells her she won't need to worry about that for long. She gets a smug look on her face thinking she finally got someone to finally fix an issue she has had nothing to do with, when the buyer tells her straight-faced that he plans to evict her the second he buys the place and that she should look forward to a visit from child services shortly. The look on her face was pure shock and awe. She loaded her poor kid into her spotless car with 20 inches chrome rims and left to I was inspecting a townhome that was obviously occupied by a wrestler. Trophies, pics, headgear signed by his whole team, workout equipment, and posters of Holtz and moves used in wrestling. A very male jock environment. You could smell the testosterone. I opened the hatch to get into the crawl space, and there's a full vinyl BDSM bodysuit with inflatable breasts, pullover mask hood, and small penis-sized hole at the mouth, adorned with fake lipstick printed into the vinyl. Not wanting to document this in the report, I brought the buyer and realtor over to show them what I found. After the initial shock, the realtor just said to the buyer that they'll make sure to stipulate that all personal items stored in the crawl space are to be removed by the sellers prior to close. I showered when I got home. The home I haven't shared this one online before, but I think it's a good one. TLDR at bottom point, I'm an independent insurance adjuster, so I go to homes that have been damaged, inspect them, create a report, and sometimes get a statement from the insured. Home I kind of go back and forth between insured and home throughout this, but it's the same person. I had a mentor that got me into the business, and he trained me by taking me into the field and had me shadow him. Usually he would take photos and talk with the insured while I got measurements and made a sketch of the home and made notes of damage to later estimate for. Now on to the actual story. As we were driving to the property, he was reading through the FNOL, first notice of loss, document with main info about the claim, and he read the description. I don't quite recall the specifics, but the cause of loss was water originating from the dishwasher, I believe. I think the description also mentioned something about bugs, but nothing in detail. Eventually we arrived at the property and knocked on the front door. The home owner answered, and let me just say, from that very moment things were already feeling strange. The way she talked and her mannerisms just seemed a bit strange. For a visual reference, for those who have seen the 007 movie, Skyfall, picture the antagonist, Raoul Silva, the character's facial features and mannerisms. Now let's assume his mother was nearly identical to him, but with red hair. That was this home owner. As for the home, it was fairly well kept and neatly cluttered with knickknacks. Nothing too out of the ordinary. My mentor was asking her about the damage as she pointed us to the kitchen and was showing us water damage to the cabinets. The toe-kick, bottom part of the cabinet that touches the floor and is usually recessed a few inches, was especially damaged. Keep in mind, the whole situation felt strange from the beginning, but not too strange. Just a little off. Anyway, this is where she started talking about the bugs. I was thinking something like, okay, the cabinets got wet and water must have been sitting under the cabinets, and a damp and dark place would likely be great for bugs. I progressed with getting measurements and drawing up my sketch while my mentor continued to talk with the home owner. I wasn't sure what the deal was with the bugs, but I could see the water damage and I figured that's what my mentor would want me to focus on. I felt like I pretty much had everything I needed at that point, so I reconvened with my mentor to see if we were ready to head out. My mentor and the homie Arwana were walking out of the master closet while the homie Arwana was talking about how the bugs would eat holes in her clothes. I guess she was wanting to claim her clothes as damaged property. Either that, or she was trying to get the insurance company to pay for pest control or something. At this point my mentor started asking about the bugs. We hadn't seen any, so I guess he was just looking to get more info on the subject and possibly determine if there actually were any bugs. Since we had been there, I hadn't heard her say what kind of bugs. Not ants, roaches, termites or anything. Just bugs point at this point. After my mentor inquired more about the bugs, we were in the living room and she happened to grab some tweezers. To the best of my recollection, she said something to the effect of, well, let me show you some of the bugs. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of bugs, especially roaches, but I was there to learn all I could about the business, and I was rather curious too. She walked toward the back door and knelt in front of the doormat. I was mainly just keeping my eyes peeled for bugs and wasn't too focused on what she was saying, but for the most part she was just rambling about the bugs. Things like how bad the bugs were, how many of them there were, and that they were all over the place. It was at this point things started to get a bit more strange. She took the tweezers and began to pick at the doormat. Would you just look at all these bugs? I don't know where they're coming from. She picked up literal pieces of grass and other debris that you might find on your shoes after walking outside, and it seemed as though she believed those were bugs. She was even picking pieces off of the doormat itself and presenting them as if they were bugs. Pieces of the doormat, small bits of grass, twigs, etc. She seemed to think it was all bugs. She continued on rambling. And that's where it got really weird and very uncomfortable. Something needs to be done about this. I can't live like this. There are bugs everywhere. They're inside me too. And in my head. Yep. She said that. And oh boy, that feeling of discomfort. My mentor and I looked at each other. We both knew that we both wanted to leave. It was a bit of a process and took a little while working our way to the front door. She just kept going on and on. Eventually we said goodbye and managed to make it out the door and headed straight for the car. If you're not following what was going on, basically she had some sort of mental illness. Can't really say what it was exactly, but she believed that there were things there that in reality were not there. Things being bugs. My mentor and I were definitely talking about that for a while after we left. It was pretty weird and quite uncomfortable. However, ultimately we just felt bad for her. It seemed as though she didn't have any family to speak of, and no one that was there to help her out. Not to mention there was actually water damage in her kitchen, and having your home damaged is hard enough, but having to deal with it on your own is a lot harder anyway. We got out of there with no issues, and for those interested, I'm not sure if the claim was paid or not, or what came of the situation. The claim was assigned to my mentor, and not to me, so I had no contact with the insurance company. If anyone's interested, I guess I could ask him what all happened afterward. He's a really busy guy and deals with a lot of claims, but I doubt he'd ever forget that one point. TLDR, I'm an independent insurance adjuster. Was inspecting a home with my mentor. The homie Arwana had some sort of mental illness and believed there were bugs all over her house, and while she was using tweezers to pick at her doormat and claiming that pieces of small grass and twigs were actually bugs, she said they're inside me too. And in my head, it was quite uncomfortable to be in the home of a mentally ill individual who believed that pieces of grass and twigs were bugs, and that they were also living inside her and her head. Former cable installer. I have too many. People are freaking gross. Like really gross. I entered a very wealthy house and the people living there completely had trashed the white carpets. They were very ratchet, and when I went behind the computer on the floor to hook up vintage internet cables, there was a dead mouse half rotted, a mini bag of open Cheetos, potato chip crumbs, and ashtray ashes. It was disgusting. Guy who is mentally ill is getting a divorce apparently from someone also mentally ill, and both allegedly left on vacation at the same time, with 4 cats and 2 dogs living in a house with 0 food. Guy is there waiting on us, and my partner and I show up. I was in training still. Inside, there is trash everywhere, half eaten by the starving animals, with vomit everywhere from said animals. The ammonia stench was so bad we couldn't perform the job, not to mention the trash. The guy had that crazy glassy-eyed look to his face, like he was mental for sure. We called dispatch, reported it, and noped da fuck out. 3. Douchebag boyfriend was mad at his girlfriend. He looked like one of those unemployed skater stoners who mooched off his working GF. Anyway, he is sitting home, waiting on us. We get there, and have to go into the basement. On the way to the basement, on the first step, there is cat vomit. The guy says, bro, be careful of that first step, there's cat vomit on it from my girlfriend's cat. He had that scumbag Steve hat on backwards, and was clearly fighting with his GF or something for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Remember that movie, with that pale guy who was death? Well, I was in training, and I went to this guy's apartment. He opens the door, with a white pale face like death, and he had a faking cloak. Now I could get it, if it was like post Harry Potter, and he was really into Hufflepuff, but no, this guy was a faking weirdo into cloaks. Not even like swords and cloaks like maybe he was a Renaissance actor at medieval times. Nope, just a weirdo. So, we go into his bedroom, and the guy has 2 tackle boxes with every type of pill imaginable. There must have been about 30 bottles. We went over to his laptop, and I swear to God there was so much dried semen on that thing I didn't even want to touch it. The key stuck in the down position, from all the residue. I was about to puke. 5. Hot B guy. So, I was on my own. And, for the backstory, I'm a white masculine gay dude into black guys. I go to this home, and the door opens, and this drop-dead Georgia light-skinned guy with a six-pack and pretty waves opens the door with a smile as bright as the sun. He invited me in to hook up his living room and bedroom computers. They were those older Pentiums or something. This was the late 90s, I think. Anyway, he says his wife is coming home, and she arrives. She is about 350 pounds, dark-skinned, and exhausted from work. She quips about him not working, and she is a breadwinner. 2 teen kids who looked like him come down the stairs. The oldest seems to take to me, like a kid to a teacher, amazed with my tools and stuff. Anyway, I go down into the basement, and it was completely the oddest thing I ever saw. It was full of trash bags. It didn't smell, but from end to end the floor was covered with black trash bags. It looked like they may have been filled with newspapers or something else that was soft and crunchy. I had to move some, and they weren't heavy. It was just really weird. Anyway, I'm fiddling with the splitters in the basement and the guy comes down the stairs with his A-shirt, wife beater on, and sweet pants, and starts talking to me, and as I turn around he is juggling his junk under his sweatpants. Not like a readjustment, but more like see what I got semi-hard. I completely blushed, and I would never mess with a married guy or a client, so I turned away embarrassed, and like damn he is so hot. I couldn't wait to get the F out of there, finished the job, and dipped out. 6 filthy smokers. I went into countless filthy smokers' homes with yellow windows from smoke, with keyboards that were really ashtrays that were like trash cans, and people who drank way too much Mountain Dew at 4 AM. They always had a video game joystick with sludge on it from like Snickers or Cheetos 7, Velvet Elvis. I was briefly in emergency medtech in college, and we went into this Spanish lady's house to take her to the hospital. She was pregnant and her water broke. Upon entering the house, over the mantel was a Velvet Elvis painting, surrounded by those Jesus rosary candles and tiny picture frames of Elvis. To each their own. Point 8. Bedo House. One of the strangest places I ever went was a house that had 7 doors off of the living room, all locked, no furniture and a TV at one end. I never saw anything or felt anything this odd before. The layout was like a long cigar-shaped ranch-style house, but on a main street. You approached it from the front, like a wide stately manor with the front door in the middle, but this was much smaller. I entered the front door and stood right in the middle of an empty living room. No foyer, no mudroom. It was odd. This room was kind of like half an octagon, but instead of the 4 sides of an octagon, it had 7. 7 doors were off of this room. Immediately it reminded me of one of those 1920s brothels with the main chamber and side rooms for whatever they did in brothels. So this room is painted grey, pretty big, and there is a 32-inch vintage tube TV at one end on the floor that looked like they gotten it free. The man told me I'm not allowed past any of these doors, nor the basement. I'm only allowed in this room, to attach the cable if possible. Right away I knew I would not be, but I cut a piece of cable to attach the TV from the wall outlet for the next guy. While doing this, a door opened, and there was a little boy there, about 11, and he had that look. I never forgot that look he had on his face. Clearly something bad happened to that kid. The man yelled at him, and he quickly closed and locked the door. I got out as fast as possible. I just felt like there was some evil going on in that house. It was weird. Never felt that way before. 9 Pimpin' Pete. Back in the day I delivered pizzas, and we had a client named Pimpin' Pete. He had 2 hoes, right in the living room off the street. There was a mattress right there, and the 2 women, one black and one white, were strung out on crack at the time and possibly heroin, and the black one later got pregnant. Anyway, he always paid in cash, and was a great tipper. Typically when I went there he was passed out on the floor next to a stack of cash, a pistol, and a bunch of weed that he just smoked. I didn't mind going, because the tips were great, but it was a side of life I really don't care for, now that I'm older. Oh boy, I've got 2. I'll start off soft point. I used to be an on-site computer technician for a computer repair shop. One time I was called out to a guy's house because he couldn't stream videos on his computer. This was slightly before Netflix, but after YouTube, so I figured a flash player install. I go out, he shows me the computer. I ask him to replicate the issue. He pulls up a Born site. He says YouTube works, but Born doesn't. Okay, sure. So I check it out, and they use an embedded Windows media player doing some copy protection, because he pays money to watch weird porn. Okay, I can still fix this. Problem is, I have to sit in this chair, and use this mouse and type on this keyboard at his masturbation station. It's actually crusty. I tell him next time just bring the computer in. Turns out, he doesn't want his wife to find out. So on the way out, when I want to dip my hands in lava, she comes home and wants me to show her how to do things on the computer. This next story is a bit more disturbing. I was called out pretty far from the city. Think faint banjo sounds kind of deal. Anyway, I get to this pretty nice home and meet an older guy who's just having Wi-Fi troubles. He got a new router, but his computer wasn't connecting across the house. It was pretty big, so that's understandable, at least at the time, when wireless routers were terrible. So he knows the password and everything, so I'm thinking he knows what he's doing, just needs a different antenna or something. Well, he takes me to a long, dimly lit room, bookshelves on either side and the computer desk at the far end. The desk was a normal desk, a few feet from the wall and either bookshelf on the sides. As I walked toward the computer, he walked behind me. I looked on the shelves, not full of books, but displaying old grey comic books in little stands. Or maybe magazines? Then I noticed the characters on the covers were all naked women in different poses, but clearly illustrated. Think WWII poster illustrated. He proceeds to explain that he collects vintage erotic magazines. Okay, sure. Everyone has their hobbies. As luck would have it, his Wi-Fi went away after I rebooted. He hadn't done that after installing the new router and his old computer just wouldn't connect. After rebooting again, I made sure it came up. Easy, not even gonna charge him for the minimum hour, just the travel time, since it was pretty far. While we are walking out, I look at another cover and see one of the women is getting plowed by Hitler. I saw another with SS officers getting BJs. Then another cover depicting a woman with a cum Hitler mustache winking. This guy didn't just collect vintage porn, he collected Nazi porn. I was a go-fair for a plumbing/HVAC company. The work order said that the air conditioner wasn't working at a local, albeit lower socio-economic, apartment complex. Before the guy in charge and I jumped out of the van, he handed me a flathead screwdriver and said, "Keep this in your front pocket." Walk up to the room and the tenant, who frickin' called US, told us that we shouldn't be disturbing him. After explaining to him, he let us into his pitch black apartment. My supervisor walked right in, I followed, and the tenant closed the door behind us. Nothing but silence as we stood in the dark. Some rustling occurs, and then I cave, turn around, feel the wall for the switch, and turn the light on. The wall, as I remember it, was sticky point. Before I turn around I realize that I'm surrounded by newspaper and magazine stacks. No joke when I say these stacks were at least 4 to 5 feet tall. The towers in my line of vision to my left are all yellowed from years of smoking damage. The smell of cat piss and feces really hits you when you realize you're in a hoarding den. Mind you, I haven't turned all the way around yet. I turn around and my supervisor has turned to face me and with wide eyes is staring at me. To my left is the tenant, standing awfully close to me. To my right, huddled behind the stacks of paper, is the sketchiest of crackheads. Behind my supervisor, to my 12 o'clock, is that crackhead's crackier cousin. Never knew people could appear homeless within their home, but I found myself in a potential dirty Mike and the boys scenario. These dudes didn't talk, just stared and pointed towards the afflicted unit. In between the beds. These mattresses must have had 40 years of use with how sunken in they are, I thought. My supervisor, justifiably freaked out by the bug-eyed residents and flea-infested room, snatched the flathead out of my pocket, popped the front end of the AC unit off revealing a frozen block of ice, and said, "Somebody will be back next week when it's thawed. Might want to put the newspapers under it to soak up moisture." Never seen man scurry back to his work truck and be grateful for the next job as quickly as he did. Guess the weird part was their condition of living. Never mind the crackheads or the hoarded materials, and the shock of realizing that I was outnumbered. Super late on this subject, but I used to install cable about 6 years ago. I came across a few things that were weird to me. A goat with its own apartment. Context: I don't even know how to elaborate on this besides a family living in the second floor let their goat have the entire apartment on the first floor too. Hoarder's apartment. Mountains of clothes and miscellaneous things had to maneuver around. Saw dead rats all in the kitchen. Noped out of there. 3. One of the cleanest apartments I've ever seen. This was indeed weird to me. We have some of those super high-rise low-income buildings here. They are known for being poorly taken care of and no one likes to take calls there because the main boxes are in the garbage room. Rats, roaches, all right in front of the main boxes. Well, I took a service call and didn't have to go to the main box, but the apartments are still pretty bad, since if there are roaches in the building, everybody has roaches. Not this guy. He had every nook and cranny corked, light grey carpeted floors. Everything was perfect in the apartment, like oddly perfect. Right on the other side of the door, grime all on the outside of the door, the walls, the windows. Soon as you super into his place, the complete opposite. Really nice guy too. 4. The all-white apartment. Luxury condo on top of the Embassy Suites Hotel. Everything in the house was white. Everything not white was hidden. Cable boxes, sound systems. Nothing a normal house guest could see was not white. No one is going to see this, so I'll just stop with those. In the late 90s I worked for an alarm company as a repair technician fixing problems. One time I was sent to add additional alarm zones onto an existing house that had more rooms added onto it. Their home had a basement where the alarm panel and wires ran to. I needed to see how much length of wire was needed to make it from the panel to the new alarm contacts upstairs through the floor. In asking for permission to go into their basement, it was met with concerned looks by the brothers that owned the home. After some discussion between them, they let me go into the basement. I was led through 2 rooms filled with white power posters and Nazi memorabilia. As we get to the last room before the brother opens the door, he turns around and asks me about pot plants. Inside the pot plant room's closet was the alarm panel. I replied with, "I'm just here to do my job and take care of the clients." The room had a lot of plants growing in it with hydroponic units around. He could see that I wasn't shocked by what I saw. Later they offered me some to take, but I declined because I drove a company truck and would randomly get tested. It turned out that their alarm system was so old that they got a free upgrade, and it included newer style keypads showing which zones were armed with door chimes. Several months later the clients refused access by another technician to add more zones because he wasn't Caucasian, so they asked for the me to return. I later told my manager why the other tech wasn't allowed in their house. So for any future service calls I was kept as their tech. Not a worker, but people who were at home when the worker came over. He came to set up the Wi-Fi and would be there around 12 PM to 4 PM. It's great when they trap you at your own home. We didn't know when exactly he would arrive, so we thought we would clean up the room a little and smoke some weed. We thought it would be a funny idea to prepare the table in the room with all of the smoking stuff to get a funny look from our electrician. He arrived way earlier than we thought he would. To be clear, we were in the middle of smoking. He entered and was a nice and funny guy in his mid-20s. He arranged the Wi-Fi for us and began to talk about how bad the apartments in this area are when we said that we wanted to get a new one anyway. Until this point he hadn't even mentioned the strong smell of weed in the room. He said that he knows some nice apartments exactly in the area we were planning to move and that the landlord is very friendly and would be the right for us because he smokes too. He said that with a big grin on his face and pointed to the nicely prepared table. We proceeded to talk a few more minutes about him and how he is pro-legalization. We live in Germany and proceeded to smoke our joints after my friend asked him if he was okay with it. He himself doesn't smoke anymore because of his job and driver's license, but still loves the smell. Here is a picture of our table. His is from the other side. The house I live in definitely has either the weirdest thing a support worker has seen, or one of the weirdest. I live in a house where all 4 humans who live here are disabled in some way, including myself, so a support worker or nurse visiting isn't odd. I collect figures, mostly anime figures. 2 of these figures are on the slightly more perverted side, with one having a top that exposes a lot of her breasts and has the option of just having completely bare breasts, but I don't display her like that, but I keep that one in my bedroom. However, the other figure I love so much that I keep her in the living room. There's nothing over the top bad about her, she just doesn't have a skirt / trousers / shorts / etc. She has a top on and has panties. And her post draws full attention to her as she's really cute and really well sculpted, and I like the character though, which is why I keep her here. I don't care enough to move her when we get someone visiting, even if I know they'll be going to the living room. All but one visitor either didn't notice or didn't care. One support worker entered the room, started commenting on how cute and pretty the figures are, and then her gaze fell on this particular figure and she just stopped. She stood there, silent and unmoving, for a couple of moments, and then sat down and didn't mention the figures any further. So yeah, pretty sure my figure is the weirdest thing she's seen. I'm not a wordsmith by any means, so I apologize if this feels a bit disjointed. I did appliance delivery for Lowe's for a couple of years. On one delivery, we were delivering a washer and dryer to a beautiful, huge home in the suburbs of the city I was from in late October. There were 2 of us, and we'd take turns either being the guy to unload the truck and the other guy goes in to find out the location, get measurements, and see what the easiest way to get the appliances in and out. Luckily, I got the inside job first, since it was blistering hot outside, and you don't want to be the one in the scalding hot metal truck. I go in, scope everything out, get the old washer and dryer set up to be pulled out of the house. To get to the laundry room, you have to pass through the living room. Beautiful living room. It was so nice that you have to look around to admire what they had done with the place. Anyway, I see they've got some Halloween decorations set out on the floor. Look to be like some sort of deflated humanoid thing that you would blow up. Maybe a scarecrow or something. Cool of them to be in the Halloween spirit. I've gone in and out of the house a couple times to talk to my partner to coordinate everything before we are ready to pull the old ones out. We finally go in, pull the washer out, and as we are wheeling the washer out of the home, we look into the living room, and then what I thought was a faking Halloween decoration moves its faking eyes and stares at us as we walk, turns sprinting by. Apparently, what I thought was a deflated blow-up Halloween decoration was an actual living, breathing human with apparently no faking bones in his body. They basically just unfurled their son on the floor and he just spent his days as a boneless rug of a human being watching TV in the living room. To this day, it still faking haunts me. I've tried over the years to Google anything about boneless humans and have never been able to find anything close. Needless to say, but we set a speed record of replacing those appliances. Edit. This has been the closest thing I've ever been able to find to help people visualize what he looked like. My time to shine. I've talked about my hoarder The one who lost a husky in her apartment. It died and she just buried him under trash. The cobwebs were as thick as sheets. We thought she tacked sheets over the windows. They were webs. Trash was waist deep. She didn't sheet on or into her toilet. She sheeted her toilet. I remember the footprints on the floor, surrounded by caked sheet an inch thick. The bed, the part she slept on, was slick with body filth. Wet with it, and stuck to that wet spot, a vibrator. Now, it's important to note this tenant looked like Ogra from the Dark Crystal. So I have to live with the image of her faking herself in that filth and stench for the rest of my life. So that's for that. Lady Point. I've seen a homemade setch dungeon, complete with a setch swing made from plywood and inner tubes. They'd also crafted an inner tube strap-on with bike tubes and a do with sheetrock screws. There was a dry erase board on her door with pricing information. $5 for a hand job, $20 for setch, $25 for an all, etc. This was the daughter's room. She was like 15. The parents were pimping her out. People did go to jail for that one. You can bet. Point. I've seen sheet-like closets with locks on backward, so kids could be locked inside, with drawings and sad sheet, like I want to die written inside. Horrible nightmare fuel. Sheet kids, babies helpless, naked while mom is out of her mind on heroin walking around at night. Point. I've seen every manner of weird setch thing. People faking, walking around naked, setch toy drawers, walls in closets full of S&M gear. I've seen every kind of sheet flood horror, backed up toilets, dead people that had been days for weeks, and murder scenes. Working for low income housing takes a special sort. It's hard to remain positive doing this job. You lose faith in humanity, and you have to be heartless sometimes. I evicted a family last week. The dad was absent and the 15-year-old daughter was trying to hold the whole house together herself and just couldn't. It was a trash heap. She knew they would lose their home and just didn't know what to do, and her dad had failed her. It kills me inside sometimes. I once worked on a cleanup crew for what we found out just before we started was a murder in a very nice home in Destin, FL. The weird thing that I find in there was dead guy dust. Point. My bro and I were both working for Service Master at the time, and we were called to do an inventory/cleaning at a house that was damaged by fire. We get the supplies we need and head out to meet up with the rest of the crew we would be working with that day. 4 others were there waiting for us. We went through intros and admitted the houses surrounding us. After about 15 minutes or so, our supervisor for the day arrived. That's when we found out what had happened there. Point. Evidently the house was owned by a gay couple. One of them was cheating on the other, so naturally, the one that was being cheated on waited till his boyfriend went to sleep and set him on faking fire in the bed. Freaked us out because we had never done anything with potentially harmful biological matter. Also faking dead body. Much to our relief, the body has long since been removed, and we were basically just going to inventory everything for the insurance company. Literally every single product in the house had to get logged and recorded. And I mean everything. We had to count hairpins. So we suit up in these full body zip up jumpsuits and get to work. We were broken up into teams. My bro and I of course were one team. The one girl ended up getting sick with this total debro douchebag. We were each assigned a room or two to catalog douche, and girl end up going to the garage. This is where it gets really funny. Debro was super afraid of catching Teggy while we are cleaning it up. So he volunteered for the garage, since that's where all the tools and other manly things were. Boy was he right. It's where all of their DOS and gay porn was stored. Yes, the homophobic guy ended up having to personally catalog a bunch of hardcore gay porn magazines and videos. I was doing a fire alarm installation at an elementary school once. In the attic crawl space of the school, when I was pulling wire I kept finding cigarette butts and empty beer and pop cans all over the place. Thought it was just past contractors. Didn't really think anything of it until I had the maintenance guy show me down into the tunnels to run wire. These tunnel crawl spaces lead to every entrance and had a grate above them right near the door for snow to fall through. We found school chairs at every place there was a grate. Later when running wire there was a large space area kind of under the gym for all your service hookups. Space enough to stand up straight. I found another chair with a mountain of cigarette butts next to it and a hole drilled through the floor above. I stuck my fish stick in the hole and went looking to see where it came out. It was the girls' bathroom. I was extremely creeped by all this, notified everybody I could point. They later contracted our company to put in a better security system, but no cameras. They had repeated false calls by the system for motion detectors going off at all hours of the night, usually around 1 to 3 am. The cops that came never found anything. We kept coming back thinking it was an issue with our system, but it was all clear. It's almost like somebody was secretly living in that school. I'm not aware of anything else being found, but I know after all that they put padlocks and hatches on all of the crawl space access doors. I was a telephone install tech for a company in Houston during the late 90s, before they became AT&T, and here are the 3 strangest people I encountered. The Xena fan. This guy had a life-sized Xena doll in his living room. When I say doll I mean fully rubber functioning such doll with Xena's face, complete with outfit. Not too strange, right? However, every room in his house was wallpapered with Xena the warrior princess screenshots and photos from ceiling to floor. Then the bathroom was wallpapered ceiling to floor with Bourne pictures. Not like 80s Bourne, you know, cool Bourne. I'm talking about the most bizarre lurid sex acts you have ever seen or imagined. I'm talking about some freaky DQ shit. Oh, and lizards. Lizards were everywhere. Not just 1 or 2 chameleons walking around on the couch, but I'm talking it looked like the Isle of Lizaria. If that's even a thing. Imagine all the lizards. Then you have an idea what I'm talking about. The do lady walked into a rather large home in a very affluent neighborhood, and this woman had requested a phone jack be installed in a back service room. However, when I opened the door there were shelves and shelves and shelves of DOS. Every shape, size, form, you name it, DOS, everywhere. Point the couple that wanted to have sex on the couch while I installed a phone jack for the computer in the same room. Well, that pretty much sums it up. This couple was convinced that I wanted to watch them have sex while trying to install a phone jack. Only years later did I realize that was the perfect opportunity for a 3/some, which I'm sure was a fireable offense. I was called back to the same location 4 times in a 3-month period. A year later, was requested to install a phone jack by the pool while, you guessed it, they were having sex in the pool. But it was creepy as fuck the way they kept looking at me. Again, a great chance for a 3/some, but probably fireable. The woman did have a set of breasts that would stop a Mack truck. I worked as a pizza delivery guy in high school, and one day I got assigned a delivery to an address that was on the same street as the store was. So it gets made, and I take it, and it ends up being this giant warehouse that's literally less than 1,000 feet from the store that I thought was abandoned. So I get out of my car and try to find the door, and I see a wooden door that didn't really seem like it lead to anything. But I walk up to it, and I noticed there was a little camera right above it, and right as I knocked, this probably 15-year-old kid opened the door. He leads me inside the door, where there is this small hallway with way more cameras, and there's another much heavier steel door at the end of it, probably about 5 feet away, that's cracked open. He leads me in that door, and inside this completely beat up warehouse that I always thought was abandoned was this huge living room that was incredibly well furnished and decorated. Straight ahead there was a hallway that I guess lead to the bedrooms, and on my left there was a kitchen. I remember specifically they had one of those 80-inch curved TVs and a PS4 sitting on the coffee table and all the nicest appliances in their kitchen. So I'm kind of in a shocked state, but this huge dude comes up to me from the kitchen and takes the pizza, and I give him the receipt to sign. He was super friendly with me, asking me how I was doing and stuff. While he's signing the receipt I take another look around, and the kid and a lady I assume was his wife are sitting on the couch looking straight ahead towards the TV that's off and not moving or making a sound at all. At this point I also notice there's a handgun on the coffee table by the PS4, another on the end table, and 2 rifles and a shotgun sitting in the corner. The dude hands me the receipt and says thank you and leads me out of the house and closes the steel door behind me, and I hear what must have been at least 5 locks turn. I get back in my car and look at the receipt, and dude tipped me $30. By far the craziest shit I've ever seen. I still don't know what he had going on out of there. I'm an electrical apprentice working mainly in maintenance for state housing. I've only been an apprentice for 6 months, but here's a list of things I've seen, Houses littered with bongs, needles and other assorted drug paraphernalia. Houses so badly cockroach infested that the walls seem to move around you and anything you touch will have cockroaches coming out of it. A family with parents on drugged and a kid sitting playing with toys while cockroaches just walked around on the kid. A house that was a crime scene where a man was stripped and tortured on the lounge chair. Also many syringes. A house that the lady had tried stealing other houses' fuses when her power got disconnected by the supplier. When your lines are disconnected at the pole, no amount of fuses will help you. Had to work in a house where the tenant had previously tried to kill himself by turning all the gas on and blowing himself up. When he was later wanted by police, he jumped into the roof space and tried to escape through there, but stepped on the gyprock, drywall, and broke down through the ceiling again. We were there to disconnect the light CCT point before the ceiling was replaced. The man was present in the house at the time. Numerous rundown houses with holes in walls, ripped up floors and general filth all around. More cockroach infested houses. There's a lot of them. Cable guy here. Have lots of examples. Off the top of my head, You'd chopping up a brick of cocaine on the coffee table in his living room. Scale and bag is there too, and has prepping product point. Full BDSM setup in middle-aged couple's walk-in closet. I mean, ball gag, whips, leather mask, cuffs on rope and pulley from ceiling point. Such toys out, and born playing in MSTR sweet exotic animal rescue during winter. And lady had lemurs in her basement and didn't tell me. Lady put her dog away, but had an African serval, Google it, creeping around her house, and didn't tell me. Let it sneak up behind me and scare the shit out of me. Old couple in a trailer, 70s in age. Husband was bedridden and recently had both legs amputated from the knee down, and he was a big boy. Too big for her to handle, so there was 5 gal buckets around the hospital bed, which was in the living room, full of pee, pup, and bandages / drainage from his wounds. Ex-boyfriend shows up to a house I'm installing and starts trying to fist fight his ex-GF. He shoved her down and drove off. She called the cops. Couple of heroin addicts passed out in their bed. When I knocked their 3 years old in a diaper answered the door and just came outside, let out the 3 pit bulls into the neighborhood. Neighbors did not want to help me. Had to call the cops myself. I've worked in both aged care and home care. For a bit of background, aged care is more facility based where a resident needs varying types of care throughout the day, whereas home care can be aged or disabled, who might need help to shower and get dressed, but otherwise can function well enough. Often they lived with family who felt it inappropriate to take care of personal needs, which is understandable. One guy had dementia. He was living with his daughter who drove a school bus, so it was timed well. By the time I finished with the guy, his daughter was back. Was pretty standard. Get him up, toileted, showered, dressed, but he started becoming sexually inappropriate. Old people have dry thin skin which can tear easily, so after showering, out came the moisturizer for arms and legs. Obviously I didn't moisturize his bits, but he started getting hard-ons, begging me to touch it. I kept my cool and reminded him he was being inappropriate. At first the reminders were enough, but as his dementia got worse, he would try to grab me. I'm a guy, I should add. But I knew he had grown kids and was widowed, so I have no idea if the dementia made him think I was someone else or whether he was closeted, as would be more common for his era. As a side note, I encountered another guy who was closeted. He wasn't inappropriate when I cared for him, but he basically said he feels he wasted his life by hiding. The worst one I've ever seen was when I was working as an electrician. Attended the client's house to fix a faulty light a long way out in the desert. When I arrived, nobody was there to answer the door, so I let myself in. The house was part of a special needs community, so I wasn't really breaking and entering. I started to call out from within the house asking if anyone is home, checking the rooms by knocking, opening the door slowly, etc. I got to the main bedroom, and I noticed the distinct smell of pup. I held my breath and looked inside. There was a pile of used diapers in the corner, and a seemingly comatose person on the bed with a diaper on. I called out to him, told him why I was here, and if I could fix the light. No response, just continued to look straight ahead with his eyes open. Didn't move. I tried to turn on the light. Didn't work. This one was obviously the broken one. Realized later that the light switch wasn't clean. Yuck. I closed the door. There was no way I was working in that environment, health risks and all, so I called my boss and told him I wouldn't do it and why. He agreed that I shouldn't. So I got ready to leave. I had a long drive back, so I thought I should take a pee before doing. So went back into the client's house to use the toilet because I thought it was unprofessional to pee on a tree outside. Even after what I had seen, I would doubt anyone would care. The toilet was obviously broken. A huge pile of used toilet paper, like a mountain on top of the toilet bowl. Went to see if there was another toilet in the house. Opened up the second bedroom door, thinking it might have an insight or something, but the floor was destroyed. It looked like someone had taken an axe and destroyed all the floorboards. Basically they made a huge hole in the floor. This was their new toilet. TLD, a mentally ill customer wearing a diaper didn't seem to notice me. There was a pile of used diapers in the room. The toilet was broken and a huge pile of used toilet paper piled on the bowl. The bedroom floor was destroyed to make a pup hole. 2 stores. I worked maintenance for a funeral home in Michigan. Though you think the story would be about the actual funeral home, it's not. The funeral home I worked for bought a house from this family, whose mom lived there, and passed away. The house and property bumped up against our property, and the house was an eyesore, and they wanted it demolished. Before demolishing it, the new owners of the house, the people I worked for, wanted us to investigate the home and see if any property inside was worth selling for some extra money. They told us we could split it 50/50. Happily we went inside, but little did we know, we entered the portal to hell. Like, the main portal, where the fat beach demon boss you kill in video games spawns. Let me explain what I saw. You know the show Hoarders? This was the season finale home. Not actually. Trash everywhere, no place to walk, cat litter bagged and stored in multiple rooms, an actual skeleton of a dead cat downstairs, the smell of cat piss, 5-gallon buckets full of human waste, no beds available, just her old dirty chair she slept in, and so much more. We walked through the home as best as possible to take it all in, while trying to avoid tetanus. My friend that I worked with had to turn back and leave to vomit outside. I kept walking, but had to leave myself. In the end, nothing was worth keeping, and the house was demolished with the demons themselves inside too. Story number 2. I'm now a cop and work for a federal agency. This really isn't a story, but I've been to multiple homes with dogs that just shit anywhere they please, and the owners, who sometimes have kids, don't clean it up. Thanks for eddying. First job I had was as a mover, so let me give you a list. Keep in mind that my company also hired out as just manpower, so we occasionally just moved stuff around in the house for people. Had her in-house move for moving several large items. Lady was clear as day a hoarder, and was also elderly and living by herself. There was this gorgeous yet huge buffet cabinet thing. I'm talking an easy 4-person move. Thank God for straps. Moved it and discovered the remains of a dead cat. The lady just blinked and went, oh, so that's where he went. Found a Born magazine under a teen's mattress. We hid it in his dresser. You know the stereotype for those middle-aged people who you see go to poetry slams, collect art, love contemporary styled anything, and all that jazz. Yeah, moved a couple exactly like that. They seemed very nice and everything. Things got very awkward for us though, when we found a set chair found a dildo in a retired couple's closet. No one else lived with them. Not really weird, but more epic and ugh. Made me so nervous to move. Moved a fellow cosplayer's 8 to 9 foot tall Gundam cosplay. Like, this thing was detailed and well built. I wish I was making this one up. We walked away from this one, but we walked into this apartment where the dude was being evicted. There was drugs everywhere. Nothing was packed. The place was trashed. We told him straight up, good luck finding anyone to move you when you haven't even packed, let alone just have drugs just casually laying about. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. I used to work as a pest control technician, bug guy, so I would regularly spray the interior of homes if the customer requested it. There was one lady, attractive in her 30s, and I was early 20s at the time, whose home I would spray once a month, exterior and then interior. Same date, same time, every month. She knew what time I was going to be there, and yet every single month I'd show up, and she would be just stepping out of the shower and walking around her house in nothing but a towel. That always seemed a little odd to me, almost like she was tempting me to come onto her or something. I also used to spray at a nasty apartment complex because they always had bad roach problems. I would show up, the apartment complex manager would give me a list of apartments that I needed to spray, and he would give me the keys to said apartments. I would knock loudly, announce myself, then wait. If no answer, I'd knock again, announce myself again, and wait. Then if there was still no answer, I would unlock the door and go in. Once I walked in on a guy snorting what I assume were lines of cocaine off of his coffee table. I startled him when I walked in, but he didn't skip a beat and ask me if I wanted to smoke some weed with him. I politely declined, sprayed his apartment, and swiftly left. Another time I walked in on a woman, sprawled out on her couch completely naked, with her Hitachi working overtime. She didn't hear me announce myself because she was watching porn and had headphones on. She jumped pretty good. When I walked in, I apologized and immediately turned around. She didn't get her apartment sprayed that month. Condo manager here, and I'll just give you my top 3. The rain unit. I got a complaint from the cleaning staff that the carpet in front of a unit door was always damp and was starting to smell of mildew. I sent a notice of entry message, got no response, and entered with my maintenance staff to find a family of 6 in a 1-bedroom unit running 4 humidifiers. The humidistat was registering 55% indoors with an outdoor air temperature of -14°C that day. Water was dripping from the window frames and running down the walls. $75,000 IM repairs later, and the family was still insisting that it was perfectly normal to keep the unit at over 40% humidity. The king of the roaches, a 30-year-old guy living alone in his dead mother's condo filled to an average of 3 feet with garbage, food waste and his collections. This created a cockroach infestation that eventually affected all 120 units in the building and led to the removal of almost all the interior finishes and walls. It took 3 40-foot dumpsters to get rid of the waste and 4 weeks of repeatedly treating the building for roaches to get the problem under control. Anyone who stays in multi-residential property management long enough will end up finding a resident who's passed away. After just 7 years in this business, I had been unlucky enough to find 3 people, but lucky in that I found all 3 shortly after they'd passed. The weird reality is finding your live clients in situations of distress. One screaming for help after the fridge fell on her when she tried to pull it out to clean the floor under it. Another trapped in his tub for over 24 hours with a back injury, and my personal favorite, the resident of the over 30th floor unit who locked herself on the balcony while sunbathing nude and smashed her neighbor's window with a potted plant trying to get help. When I asked her why she didn't just break her own window to get back in, she looked more embarrassed than she did about the locking herself out in the nude part. It's a weird and wonderful job. DOS and a half naked woman. I delivered pizza and I live in a suburban area. I actually had my coworker jump my line in the delivery because it was on a bad street where one side contains low rent apartments but the other side contains nicer homes set further back from the road. Due to proximity to the store and the fact one demographic is too poor to tip and the other is too frugal, you rarely get a tip. So it came up on the system as the grid A for which nobody ever wants to deliver to. He was supposed to go, but he took my order, which was to a nicer area on the other side of town. I was relieved it was at the nicer houses across the street because there was a higher chance I would get some tip. There was a dude who I assume was her husband in the yard cutting some wood with a chainsaw. I knock on the door and this straight up MILF answers the door. It was cold, so she invited me in because she had to get money from her purse. It wasn't until I stepped in and noticed she looks like she just stepped out of the shower. She was wearing a sheer white like silk robe. Nothing was left to the imagination. There were DOS out on the end table by a sofa. I got paid a $9 tip in quarters. It was a very confusing delivery and one I will never forget. I used to replace light bulbs for LED and stuff like that. Weirdest house ever was probably a hoarder that worked for Canada Post. So as I walk in I notice a ton of sheet piled everywhere and knew right away this was gonna be weird. He followed me around to each room, but I couldn't reach any of the bulbs without risking hurting myself. Every room I tried to open, the door would hardly move, and every time he would say just push, so I did, and it was always a mountain of clothes, like I couldn't see anything under all the clothes. That was the first floor. Proceed to the basement, and it was faked up, just piles and piles and piles of empty cat litter boxes. Me and the guy had to walk like solid snake hugged up against a wall to get anywhere. I thought I was going to see a dead cat or something. The thing that made me gag though, at the end of the visit I have to lay out all the sheet I've replaced and count it all. So I usually do it at the front door, and theirs was too much sheet, so I started to lay them on the front porch, but the bulbs would roll all over, so I asked if I could set his little carpet he had at the front outside to prevent them from rolling. He goes sure. I tried to lift the rug up, but it was stuck, so I pulled harder and the rug came up with a shhhhhhhhhh noise, and underneath was mold and a colony of bugs. Thank God the guy took off somewhere, because I ran outside, and wretched good fact that was nasty. Dude gave me the creeps too, all monotone and sheet. If anyone reads this, I only encountered 2 hoarders on that job, and both lived in Edry, Alberta. Also, whenever I was in a brown family's house, there would be like 15 people living there, and in every basement, hundreds of faking onions. Nice people though. Never let me leave without a banana or cookies or money or W.E. Used to work home repair. Most times it was fine. Occasionally you would have nightmare fuel. Wow, that is a lot of creepy dolls / paintings of your dead pet / taxidermy of aforementioned pet. And yeah, you had occasional awkward moments of wino. I didn't see your massive collection of vintage porn / nude photo of your wife / set swing, but one has stood out in my memory as the most bizarre. Worked in a house where the owner stacked canned goods against the wall. Not like we went a bit overboard at the store, or that doomsday prepper guy makes some interesting points. Amount of cans. Not even. I only meant to order 10 cans, not 10 pallets. Amount of cans. Just decades of buying cans and stacking them up, floor to ceiling, around every outside wall. Shelves went over doors and windows. Some places had multiple rows of cans. Then there were the windows. The homie owner cut strips of aluminium foil and taped it on the windows. Imagine measuring out the length, then carefully cutting strips about the width of your thumb. Why? Well, the homie owner was convinced the fire department was breaking in every night before she put up the strips, and the canned goods protected her from the government from listening in on her because of the metal. We soon figured out she was sleeping in her car in the garage, since they had bugged the house. It was the only place that was safe. We told her kids what we saw, and they intervened, thank goodness. Apparently she never let them come into the house, so they had no idea how bad it was. Besides naked self-portraits on the walls, and cheap rugs put over top of nice Persian rugs, so that I could get where I needed to go, through the hallways comprised of weird hoarder sheet, I've seen a fair bit. One that I giggle about still was a woman who did not speak English, and didn't really know I was supposed to be there. She had multiple chihuahuas, SP. One was particularly aggressive and barky / bitty. So I just gave it my hand to gnaw on, preferring the potential bite pain to the tedious barking as I'm trying to do my job. Anyways, his jaws were not strong enough to penetrate my skin, so this dog just gnawed on my hand for about half an hour as his owner looked at me in horror. She regarded this little dog as a protector, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I basically destroyed her world in my efforts to not have to listen to barking. I've had a few people open the door in robes or essentially naked, which is just always bizarre. The one that really got me was, I really had to use the bathroom, and there wasn't a public bathroom for a few miles, so I asked the customer if I could use his. He had a very open floor plan, and continued to carry on a conversation with me as I unleashed hell on his toilet. No change in expression. Him and I were familiar. He had been a teacher for my friend's brother and girlfriend, so we had some rapport. He also had a chirimoya and several varieties of citrus growing next to the bathroom, which I guess is about as weird. It's an amazing 2.5 story, 30 by 40 foot area inside his house that is just all sorts of awesome plants that should not grow in high elevation Colorado. For reference, it hit -26 F where I lived last night. A couple years back I worked for a small electrical company as a shop boy, putting away deliveries, sweeping, running errands, etc. And my boss asked me to go with him to a small job, which was not out of the ordinary. I would go out with him on jobs once or twice a week as just an extra hand point. On the way to this house he told me not to mention the piss or be rude to, let's say, Frank. My boss said Frank is weird, but he is paying a decent amount for the job we are doing. My boss does all his own bidding, so he knew exactly what he was bringing me to. Point: the job was very simple, running an electrical wire from the breaker box to the kitchen. He said it was a quick job and he wanted to be there as little as possible. Point: so we get to the house and walk up to the door and Frank answers. As soon as the door opens, me and my boss are hit with a wave of damp ammonia. At that point I'm glad I don't have to speak to Frank much past "Hi, I'm Chris," because it was so overwhelming. We walk in and I immediately figure out why the stench is so horrid. This guy had 12 cats all throughout the house. From what I could count, could have been more, or I could have double counted. Frank tells us to be careful and not let the cats out. They are not allowed outside. My experience gets much worse. We get into the kitchen and there is a giant hole right where the oven would be, but not like a cutout hole. It looked like the oven fell straight through or something. I never got an answer to what happened, and my boss never asked either. He told me later he felt like it was a don't ask, don't tell sort of situation. Frank leaves us to our work and I then figure out why my boss wanted me to come along. I'm a slender guy and the crawl space under the house was pretty short, so I was the designated dirt eater that day. But as we turn around to go get our tools, I notice in the corner of the kitchen 1-gallon milk jugs full of what I assumed was piss. There was at least 50 jugs, almost lethal. At this point I was thinking to myself, what piss did my boss not want me to mention, the human or the cats? We were there for roughly 30 minutes and I spent about 10ish minimums inside the house. In that time I was spayed on twice and my boss once. On the way home he handed me $100 and told me to go home, clean my clothes, and take the rest of the day off. He then told me he charged the guy an extra $200 on top of the actual work because no one else in the area would even enter the house to start the bid. I worked in a record store for a year and a half. Part of my job was going on runs with my boss, the owner of the store. We bought and sold used records, so sometimes somebody would have a very large collection in a basement or spare room spanned across several shelves. We would make a deal with them, clean them back at the store if needed, and stock the store with them. This one man, E, was in his late 80s maybe, and he worked for a record label for pop and country artists. Specifically, a writer for biographies or informational books on the bands or artists. Some of his work is in the Library of Congress. The label also gave him plenty of free books and records, and he also collected his own music memorabilia and albums. He was very close with my boss, and when he entered hospice and passed away, he left my boss his home and his collection, since he either didn't have any family or what little he did was estranged. When we entered the house through the kitchen, there was a horrid smell of old food not cleaned up, plus the dust and lint that accompanies books or LPs. Inside his kitchen cabinets, books about records. Left wall of the kitchen, 78 stacked in rows, with bookmarks to tell you which artists was where. Behind you, also bookshelves full of biographies and 45s. The bathroom upstairs had a cabinet above the mirror. In there, more country 45s. Also small red crates full of 45 stacked in the tub. You may ask, why didn't he put this stuff in the living room, the basement, either of the 2 bedrooms upstairs, or the downstairs office room? Oh, he did. So much so it was hard to walk. Traversing any room was like squeezing through a narrow cave passage about to collapse on you. Old dusty country records with no demand or value lining every wall. The basement was his main archive. Giant rows, tall bookshelves lining the entire giant basement. Even his personal bedroom downstairs was a mess. Music posters and country records around the bed. In boxes. It took up every inch of this man's life, even though he was married, and she passed a few years prior. Every time we went there to collect more, over the course of a few months we made just under a dozen runs to his house before finally selling the rest of his things as a lot. Once I got off work I would immediately take a shower. That place had an old man in it who rarely bathed. Plenty of dusty records and books, never washed laundry scattered all over, and food mess. God bless that mess. I walk dogs for people. The way it works is that the people who sign up get a lockbox, that they keep a spare key inside, and if accepted for a walk, I'm given the code for the box. Sometimes people choose to give their fancy door codes instead. You'd expect people to request walks, if they won't be home, to let their dog out. In reality there's a 50/50 chance someone will be home for whatever reason. I've showed up to sheet covered floors from very sick dogs on more than one occasion. Once I showed up for a non-recurring walk where the owner's mother was inside making dinner. I called out a few times to say hello, but she didn't seem to hear me. Eventually she turned around startled and lambasted me for not knocking. I explained that I was the dog walker and had not expected anyone to be home. She explained that she was going to surprise her daughter with dinner and that the daughter hadn't warned her about me. One of my regulars keeps their dog in a spare bedroom with a nanny cam to keep an eye on the troublemaker. I guess they left the bathroom door open one day and the dog got into the trash bin, leaving a huge mess in the room. I was asked to come in early and told not to worry about cleaning it up, but rather throw the torn up toilet paper into the bathroom and close the door. Amongst the mess was a single used condom. One job I had on Valentine's Day, I showed up at the same time as the guy's girlfriend. I came in at the end of a $500K renovation on a high-end multi-million-dollar condo overlooking the ocean. The construction was done and the owners had moved in. We were responsible for finalizing their audio, video and some punch-out stuff. The couple were very much into weird art pieces, which normally wouldn't really put me off. But as soon as you walked into the house, the male owner had a life-size statue of a 15 to 18-year-old nude girl sitting on a Roman column. She had been dressed in a frilly pink nightie. His wife seemed to be fine with it. I guess it was considered art, but it genuinely disturbed all the tradesmen I encountered that came into the house. I also had to move one of his dressers to hook up a wall-mounted TV. He had some weird surrealist looking glass minion looking two-dimensional statues. When I moved the dresser, one of them toppled over at the waist, and I thought I broke it, but I looked at it, and it had already been superglued and put back together with electrical tape. I kept working, and the guy came in screaming at me, saying I broke his art piece, and would hear a word from me that it was already broken when I started. My boss almost fired me over it. Edit. Some more. I thought a bored 75-year-old woman with a dresser full of dildos, a drugged out woman that called us to her house to fix a pocket door. She answered the door in just her bra. We proceeded to get the pocket door unstuck, and it was covered in blood. Told her we wouldn't touch it. Found a blow up doll in a guy's air duct. Bucket of moldy KFC chicken in another air duct after a air quality complaint. Finally, my time to tell the story of when I painted a room with a man. I was a maintenance tech for about a year and a half by this time, and had been given a decent amount of responsibility. I was also very good at talking to people, especially older people. Because of this trait, I was always sent to take care of the problem residents. This complex is full of 2-story buildings with each unit only taking up one floor and a small section of the overall building. There's a very large old man who lives on the first floor on the corner, meaning only 2 adjacent units total. We get a call about a bad smell in the unit just above, I assume backed up drain. I go into the unit and catch a whiff of a rather unpleasant smell. I check each of the sinks and toilets and nothing really out of the ordinary. My next thought is the old man. He usually leaves his trash just outside his door until he feels the need to throw it. Maybe there's a lot on the inside? I knock. Nothing. Office calls to no avail and makes a notice that we'll be coming in to check the smell on Monday. It was Friday. No answer to any knocks throughout the day. I get the key to enter and unlock the door, but can't get the door open. Not wanting to break the door, I grab my supervisor. He tries the door and sees that there's trash bags in the way. He tells me to give it a good push and I, being a young asshole, shoulder checked the door into oblivion, and faster than I could blink a 300-pound man that was slumped against the door fell to the floor and his too weak decaying and swelling body exploded in such a horrible way that I will never forget. I go into different homes daily and not much will faze me now. Every now and then you get the hoses, where they don't clean up after pets. Was just in a house and the floor was wet from all the dog piss and crap. Almost threw up when he opened the door. Kinda sad cause they know it's not normal, but they have stuff going on in their lives and things get out of hand. Had a different house, where I'm pretty sure she was watching TV in her bedroom, because of how long it took her to open the door. When I get to the bedroom there were a good to 5 piles of cat pup on her bed. There's the occasional hoarder house, was in a basement at one once, and heard something crawling around through all the junk, and got out of there quick. What's almost weirder is, when a homeowner falls asleep while I'm there. Had 2 houses, where they were a little older, and thought they might died on me. I hate to wake up someone sleeping, but what if I just left, and they were dead? If someone is in your house, please don't take a nap. Another weird thing is different energy usages between homes. Had one couple in a huge house, and we are sending over $10,000 a year on energy, for 2 people. Then I'll go to a normal family home with 4 people, and they are spending around $1,500 a year. The high energy users and giant hoses drive me nuts. It's unnecessary, and we don't need to use that much energy. Nice in a small home. If you buy big and old, be prepared for the high energy bills, and stay away from electric and fuel oil for heating if you can. Then there's the hoses with no TV or computer. What do they do at night? Been in close to 1,000 houses, seen a lot of different things, but for the most part, most people are the same. It's also a lot of fun seeing 100-year-old mansions one day, to brand new houses the next. Finally, something I can honestly input on. I've got a couple, so get ready. Early this year I bought a Mustang. It was literally snowing when I got it, but I got a decent deal on the price. The interest a different story. And at the time we used our personal vehicles to travel to people's houses and fix phones. So I've got a job later in the day, get my sheet and head out in my new car. I travel about 45 minutes and can't find the house. I find what I think was the right place, only to greet a very confused man, and as I leave I back into his mailbox. In my new car. I'm faking embarrassed as hell, and I go knock on his door and he won't answer. After about 30 minutes of sitting in his driveway waiting for him to come out, I decide I'm gonna try to get out of his driveway and call the sheriff. As I'm about to pull out 3 separate sheriffs block me in. I exit, explain and quickly get on my way, with the agreement I have a new mailbox there that night. Now, I have a truck too, a 1990 C1500, and I end up buying a $90 mailbox and hauling it out in my truck. At this point it's sleeting, and the roads are nasty. There's so much ice on the road we almost slip getting the mailbox out of the truck. The drive back I took a quick jaunt on the interstate and literally couldn't see the road. I finally get home about midnight, and after the longest day I finally go to sleep, with a new car and $12 to my name from hitting a mailbox point now. I did eventually get to the right house. It was filthy, they couldn't bother to clear a spot before I got there, and we had to put random sheet on the floor off their kitchen table. It was a nightmare. Second one, a bit less exciting, but similar situation. I head out to B, and end up at a trashy looking place. We are required to wait 15 minutes if there's no immediate answer to the door, and it was minute 14 as I'm about to drive away someone comes to the door. So I go in. This place was awful, reeked of pets, trash everywhere. There's obviously kids there at some point, but not while I was there. I go to set my stuff up, and his table was sticky, and I'm trying to imagine how to describe it. There was change stuck to the table and I couldn't move it. Thank God I had an oversized mat. Overall though, maybe 5% were dirty, mostly good. Now, the strangest was actually a really cool one. Locally, nicer part of town, and as I pull up I see they've got 2 really nice cars. A Jeep fully done with custom rims, the expensive ones people usually put on trucks, forget the brand, and a Rover. I got in, incredibly nice, marble counters, plush carpet, awesome TV, ECT, a super dope English bulldog, and in the corner a box with kittens in it. The couple that lived there, just wow. Both of them looked amazing. The guy was in great shape, tattoos that are just excellent, and the woman, oh my, just wow. Weird part was just how good these people looked. Like, just wow. I work in HVAC repair, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, and I'd go in anywhere from 3 to 7 houses a day usually, average probably around 5. In the last year and a half I've had 2 hoarders, a woman who was abusing dogs and a house where the only person home was a 13-year-old girl. The hoarders weren't too bad, made sure to follow the path to the furnace and didn't touch anything that wasn't HVAC equipment. The woman abusing her dogs, I didn't say a word, but called the cops as soon as I left, took pictures without her knowing, and gave them over with a full report at the station. Never heard what happened, but I assume and hope those animals were taken from her. Multiple dogs per cage, each looking malnourished. Backyard was just a fenced-in plot of dirt with a bowl underneath a leaking faucet. The house was a disaster too, just shit and trash everywhere. Horrible to see. The last one was the weirdest for me. Went to a house for a no heat call, and a young girl answers the door. I ask where her parents are, she says they aren't home. So I call the cust and ask what's up. The girl's mother tells me that it's okay, I can go in and start the work and she'd be home in half an hour or so. I refused and sat in my truck till she got there. It felt super creepy. I can't imagine trusting some man you've never met to be in your house with your underage daughter. Was a pretty poor area, so of course I imagined all sorts of horrible things that might be happening there, but saw no evidence of anything. Was definitely creepy though. I worked maintenance in a hotel, and some of the shit I saw in long-term stays, 30+ days, was interesting to say the least. One woman had a brain injury, but was still pretty independent. However, in addition to the meds she was on, she also drank a lot of alcohol. If I went into her room for whatever reason, I would see at least 3 to 4 bottles of Fireball on the couch in her room, and pill bottles everywhere. There was an older married couple and their son, who had to be at least in his 30s living with them. They were evicted from their last place because the woman was a hoarder, and then continued the transition in her hotel room. I had to unclog their toilet once, and as soon as you walked in there were trash bags full of who knows what all against the wall underneath the windows, and the room had a stench of something I haven't been able to place, but it wasn't good. Lastly, was 2 Indian couples, one of which had a teenage son. The couple without the son finally quit. They worked there. We spent literally days shampooing the carpet and washing everything in an attempt to get the smell of Indian spices out of the room. We dulled it considerably, but when I left over a year later, you could walk in and still detect the faint smell of it. The other couple also moved out, and their room was somehow worse. Indian spice smell, but with the addition of their stovetop being so covered in grease, and who knows what, I had to literally separate the entire stovetop from the counter to clean it and the counter. Never mind that their bathroom had to be repainted and repaired because one of them had torn a bar off the wall. The entire room had to be vacuumed and shampooed numerous times. NSFW. Yes, I've been looking forward to this. So I'm on work experience, meaning I go out with a worker for a plumbing company, and I watch and learn from him. Anyway, on my first day, last week Wednesday, and we rock up to the third house of the day. Toilet pipes and hot water system are faked, and it's leaking into the apartment below, so we have to go to both apartments. Aboriginal women lives on the top and a weird possible drug affected male down below. Bloke below is nice, but the chick on top was acting like she was nervous. She asked us 4 times in an hour when we'd be done. We told her by 11 AM, but we had to replace more pipes than expected, so we ended up staying longer. So my boss told me to go get something from the top apartment because he needed it, so I went up the stairs and see her on the couch. Okay, cool. All of a sudden this black guy comes out of nowhere from my left with unders on, and halfway got his shirt on. I act normal and say gdaj, and continue on to go get the tool. I come back downstairs thinking they either just faked, or are going to. They clearly hadn't, yet because the next time me and my boss went upstairs to get some of the remaining bad pipe, the bedroom door was shut. It wasn't before, and the 2 people were nowhere to be seen. I had a feeling they were doing it in the bedroom, but it was my first day, so I wasn't actually sure people could just have sex while 2 plumbers are there, could they? Well, the bathroom with the toilet in it was right next to the bedroom and my suspicions were quickly confirmed. Couldn't hear the bloke, but heard soft moaning from the chick. We continue working in silence, just exchanging looks that say what the fuck. We had to keep swapping between floors, but eventually while we were upstairs the chick came out and went to the bathroom and said she was looking for a box. There was nothing here in the bathroom that was a box, so she went and sat on the couch and watched TV for the rest of the time. She left the bathroom door open and I snuck a quick look in, and the dude was lying in bed doing nothing, just staring at the ceiling point. Also on Monday we went into our last job of the day and a woman in her 40s or 50s let us in, and on the dinner table was a ice cream box full of used cigarettes, so that was pretty disgusting. Former paramedic for 18 years here. Oh, the stuff I have seen. The most shocking was a shrine of dildos of various sizes. Above it was a custom-made wooden sign like the kind you can get made at the country fair that read Holy Anus. The wall at the back of the shrine had various attractive men displaying their attractiveness along with their genitals in various stages of erectness. What stood out to me, however, was that the larger ones each had 2 different rows of marks on them. So had more, while others had fewer. It, for some reason, reminded me how fighter pilots would mark their kills on the sides of their planes. Well, me being the curious fellow, and having no shame, because the field does that sort of thing to you, asked what the marks were for. Suffice it to say they were essentially victory markings. 1 row for each one of them. I pointed to one shaped like what I could only guess was an alien dinosaur dick, which only had 1 mark on it, and asked what the recovery time is once that mountain was climbed. The guy tapped his lips with his finger, then replied, "Oh, 10 days, before you're back to normal." I replied by drawing in a breath and saying that it seems like a lot of work for a little bit of fun. He looked back with a bit of a gleam in his eye and said, "We've each got to have goals in life." I chuckled and said, "You said it, friend." The conversation took like 15 seconds. Then we were past the shrine and into their play, where it took another couple of minutes to remove the patient from the AS presentation and all ease of access support device. He was buckled into a leather girdle / straight jacket device that had rings on each side to suspend him and the optimal height for ease of access, while he had ankle wraps with rings and his legs were pulled up and back towards his head. It was a clever setup. The room smelled heavily of bleach and pennies. Long story short, the patient was having a steamy. I transported him to the ED and watched the cath lab insert a stent in the lad. I used to work for a popular internet service provider and would go on ride-outs in London every so often to monitor installations and repairs. I have to say, there was such a wide variety of home types. Walking into each one was like being introduced to a new world for a short time. I remember one guy in a low-cost, quite messy flat who could talk to this box called Alexa to turn his lights and music on and off. That was the first time I'd ever seen that, so I thought he was some kind of tech genius who'd engineered it himself. There was another house which was absolutely stunning. It was having work done on it by multiple different people at the same time, and the owner was very blaze about the whole thing. Even through all of the dust sheets and hibis vests you could see that the house was beautiful. One of those kitchen diners that had huge B-folding doors running the length of the back of the house into the garden, a 60-inch TV and lounge area in the kitchen, separate to the normal lounge, chandeliers, marble counters, gorgeous. One of my favorites was an elderly Caribbean lady, very sweet, walls plastered in paintings of Jesus, doilies on all of the furniture, and a smell that just took me back to when I would visit my gran as a kid. Turns out she was just using the remote wrong. We got quite a few of those. The most unusual though by far was a 2-bed flat that was being shared by 4 guys. One, the landlord I assume, had his own room. The other 3 shared. There was no lounge, just those 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen. On the Sims the room to move in the kitchen would be 2 squares big, with an L-shaped arrangement of cupboards around them. I only saw inside the kitchen and the shared bedroom. The bedroom was absolutely filthy. There were 2 double beds on either side and a single bed squeezed in along the back wall. The sheets on all 3 had clearly not been changed since they were first put on. There was a fold-out table in the middle of the room easily reachable from all 3 beds, which had acted as a makeshift kitchen at some point, with moldy food, a cutting board, a knife, dirty plates, etc. There were individual electronics on each of the beds belonging to the individual occupants. You couldn't see the floor for dirty clothes, plates, bowls, cups full of mysterious liquids. It was just overall extremely unpleasant. To get to the hole in the wall where the router connection came through, the tech I was with had to move the single bed and get in the gap between the bed and the wall to do some work. He told me as he left that, while he was in the gap he was holding his breath, because along with all of the other mess, there were several used, full sour smelling condoms on the floor. The occupant of that bed must have been an absolute stallion to convince someone to bang in that room. I go for horses. I was helping a lesson program / camp find more horses. A woman was getting rid of her 3 older well-broke horses. Sounded like a great match. The woman was very forgetful and repetitive, and long-winded doesn't even begin to cover it, but she explained that she had terminal cancer and the medication makes her forgetful, and retold this story about 4x in the span of 2 hours. Long story short, the entire time was her talking to us about how she is going to die, but she wanted to try and make herself last long enough for her kids to graduate high school, and this required moving to the one doctor that could possibly do it. etc. She looked fine, but was a bit frail. She couldn't lift the saddle on anymore. To thank her for letting us come out, I offered to do the cleanup care for her horses and put them to bed and put away the tack. She was very grateful. As I was finishing up and grabbing the saddles to put in the tack room for her, she jumped up and led the way for us to show which racks for which saddle points. As I walked into the barn, I noticed she already had some stuff packed up ready for the move, and among it was a standing upright classic Dracula board coffin that looked like one of her kids maybe made it in wood shop. I pointed it out quietly to the people with me and everyone was flabbergasted. It was both hilarious and sad. Only because she was such an offbeat and cheery person for the circumstances. Not necessarily weird, but rather assuming at least. I work on my college campus as part of the Technology Center for Students. Part of my job is to go around residence halls and dorms and help improve the Wi-Fi in those areas. This mainly involves looking for devices broadcasting wireless signals that are prohibited in these areas, mainly wireless printers and personal routers. This is mainly done by walking around the dorms with a device that allows me to track the signal strength of the device I'm looking for. From here I have to knock on doors and find the device. This means I enter a lot of rooms a day. Now, this is where the fun stuff begins. Since these halls are occupied by mostly freshmen, they don't know they can just ignore me knocking if they are up to questionable tasks, not like I'm going to come back with cops. Since they don't know this, they almost always open the door, no matter what's going on in the room. This has led me to walk into people smoke weed. Pretty normal, not a big deal. Getting drunk, again not a big deal. Hiding the weed or alcohol, and sometimes both. This is always amusing as it's super obvious. And of course, you have the people who clearly were having such moments before you came in. Sometimes they'll still be half dressed when they let you in. And I can't forget the time someone asked if the device I had, the device that allows me to track wireless devices broadcasting, was used to detect weed. Always an adventure. I do maintenance work for a real estate company, and I went to a job one afternoon, and as I get to a job I was greeted by a woman who I explained why I was there for, and she invited me in and told the tenant so and so is here for this job. I assumed this lady was her relative or a friend. ECT happens a lot of times. So then the tenant showed me to the laundry where the problem was and explained to me the situation. ECT. All normal, nothing out of the ordinary. Now this is where shit gets weird. So I'm in the laundry working, doing my thing, and I can hear the other lady asking her back quote, "How are you feeling?" Back quote, "How are you doing?" ECT. And it clicked to me, this woman must be a nursifer or caretaker or something. I could hear them talking clearly, as long as I wasn't making noise, so as soon as I cut something or hammered couldn't hear nothing. But from what I could tell, when she asked her how have you been feeling? Have you been talking with friends? ECT. She kept telling her back quote, "No, no one has been talking with me," and I sort of felt sad about that comment. Anyways, fast track a little bit, I'm slowly finishing up my job, and she is laughing, and then I hear the other woman laughing. I hear her asking back quote, "So how is Peter?" And the other woman replied back quote, "Not so good, he is very sick lately, and don't know if he will make it through the year." I can't help it. I can hear what they are talking about. It's starting to get pretty creepy, asking about how, if they will be going to heaven or hell when they die, if they believe in heaven or hell, etc. And this all sounds like two people talking to one another, different voices. I finally finish up, pack up, and as I'm heading into the kitchen to tell her I am done, I see her looking into a mirror talking to herself, but asking questions like she was to the lady. She asked about if she believed Jesus would ever come back, and she replied in that same voice I've been hearing for the past 45 minutes about how she thinks Jesus is basically bullshit and fake. I tell you, I was so shocked and confused. It's like I didn't know what was happening, but I knew this woman was nuts, because as soon as I announced I was done, she instantly turned to me and said back, quote, "Oh, thank you so very much, darling. I really appreciate that," but like she was again another person. I've never been freaked out at a job or anything like that. I've never been scared of paranormal crappy CT. All that. This one time, I kid you not, I was so weirded out and freaked out. I left the job, got in my car, called the real estate. I asked them about her, and they proceeded to explain that they believe she is mentally unstable and that there is a nurse that pops in unannounced each couple of weeks to check up on her. So at some point that nurse, who I assumed was her friend etc., left after checking in, and the tenant was speaking to herself, and I assumed was that nurse. L talking back, but it was the tenant putting on the voice of a second person. I told the real estate to never send me to do any work there, and that the woman there is absolute bonkers. I've driven past, I think she is still living there. She absolutely freaks me the fuck out. Off, damn, late to the party, and probably getting buried, but whatever. I do 3D scans for architects and departments responsible of the protection of historical buildings. So I see a lot of different buildings, from the villa at the lake, to old farm buildings, to churches, you name it. I haven't seen too much weird shit, but my colleagues did. One had to scan a Setch dungeon once, completely equipped with a swing and all kinds of different Setch toys. He said the owner was totally normally looking, and you would have never expected something like that in his basement. I haven't seen him in a while. Rumors say he's still down there. Then of course you have the occasional hoarder. But besides being mind-boggling disgusting, you get used to it, and it's not really weird. Once I had to scan a flat of a person who was seeking asylum but was denied. He disappeared from one day to the other. Nobody knows what happened to him. Maybe he killed himself, or maybe he just ran away. God, I hope he just ran. His flat was like he would come back any second. There were pictures of him and his family and lots of letters with hearts all over them. Couldn't read his language though, but it was apparent that this person was dearly loved by someone. He probably came to this country to live a better life, work and send money back home, but wouldn't get the chance to do so for some stupid bureaucratic reason. Kinda broke my heart. And another time I had to scan a building with mostly students in it. They all got informed that I would be around for that day, so when I knocked on one door, a young, attractive, obviously hungover student opened the door, topless. She didn't bat an eye and was like, "Oh, that's today. Come on in. Do you mind if I stay in bed?" She just fell asleep again in her bed, and when I wanted to scan her room she still just laid there, topless. I proceeded to put some towel over her breasts, because I didn't think she was fully understanding what 3D scan means. It means I scan a 3D model of your tigs, if they are visible. Students, man, good times. Oh, and the brothel I had to scan was fun too. The ladies were really kind, and contrary to my concerns it wasn't awkward at all. I kinda got to see them when they are their normal self, and they don't have to act like those such craving slaves, which was interesting. They even made me tea, which was really nice, since I had a nasty cold back then. I've never seen that much lube though. So much lube. Literally barrels of lube. It might seem obvious looking back now, but man, those ladies live a rough life. Or the house of an old hunter who proudly showed me all his trophies. He wanted to renovate his house to give it to his son once he's no more. That guy was awesome too. Made me coffee with schnapps in it. That was a tough ride for a Wednesday morning. Or the butchery. That was bloody. Ah man, this is getting too long, and I'm off track anyways. Sorry. Literally every building, or rather every person living in the building, has an interesting story. If you keep an open mind and heart, everyone has to get by somehow. A few are lucky and live in nice places, and then there are thousands more that weren't born on the sunny side of life, but still do their best to live a dignified life. I honor and respect those people to the highest. When I had finished college and was looking for a job/career, I got a short-term job for a water remediation company. Now I get it. People have messy houses, and after a flood or fire things will be in disorder. But one house always sticks out in my mind. The house had a water leak and we were told the carpet in the basement had to come out along with some of the wall sheetrock that was damaged. It was weird because the wife of the couple would not go downstairs. The husband followed us around the whole time we were there as well. So this was a decent sized basement, and it had probably 7 or 8 6-foot folding tables with boxes of numbered CDs. This was a while back, so data storage was not as efficient as now. The husband was watching us the whole time as we had to move the tables to cut out the carpet, nervously. We got all the carpet out, set up blowers and dehumidifiers, with no issues. The second day, while cutting the bottom sections of wall out, a co-worker knocked a table over, and the boxes of CDs fell everywhere. I think the dude was upstairs at something, but either was he didn't see what happened. When I went to help pick everything up, I started noticing the labels written on the CDs, and came to realize these were all born files. Like a shit ton. It was everywhere. Now the third and last day we had one more room to do. We thought it was a small closet, and would be easy. Nope. This dude would not let us in until my boss came over and had the insurance adjuster on the phone. Dude was almost crying. When he finally lets us in, it was a small 8x10 room with 2 computers, which I now realize was a server. There were probably about 50 used condoms on the floor, as in he jacked off on them and left them on the floor. He didn't even care about the condoms, he just kept standing next to the computer to make sure we didn't unplug it. Me and this little Hispanic guy were in this tiny space with a bigger, fat guy and 2 desks trying to cut out the carpet out that had used condoms everywhere. To top it all off, at the end, my coworker accidentally stepped on the surge protector and shut down the system. Not sure what site he was running, but the husband lost it. It was pretty gross. I only worked there 1 more week. The worst part about it was the couple lives in my neighborhood, so whenever I passed by I'd owe ma about that nasty week of work. I was an NCO in the army. Occasionally we had to do health and welfare checks, which was just another way of saying inspections. Somebody got caught with crack or some shit and the battalion commander ordered a 100% on everyone in the barracks. Came across a female's room and had to wait for a second NCO, since I'm male. I enter the room and the first thing I see is a queen-sized mattress on the ground next to her twin size the army supplies you with. Nothing out of the ordinary until I saw what was hanging above it. She had a set swing installed above the bed. Had to continue the inspection, and sitting on her sink area was an assortment of dildos. Big ones, small ones, fists, giant butt plugs, the works. I guess she was in the process of cleaning them, so I continued the inspection. Didn't really go through too much stuff, because you aren't really supposed to dig through too much of their sheet, just inspect for general cleanliness. Well, I turned around to head out, and in front of the wall next to the door was a very expensive camera on a tripod, connected to a PC. I didn't see it at first, because my back was turned to it. I just sat there for a second and just kind of looked when she says, "Don't worry, Sergeant, it isn't on, unless you." She stops and looks at the other NCO. "Y'all want to?" The two of us look at each other and just busted out laughing. She wasn't being serious, but did a good job making light of the situation. But yeah, female had a sex dungeon. I'm not sure if that was legal or not, but I didn't care enough to find out. I was a more you do you type NCO when it comes to such matters. Oh man, I got one point. I used to install satellite dish when I was about 19. I worked alone and would usually go to 3 to 5 different job sites a day. Well, one day I was wrapping up things a little early, so I called the last customer and let them know I would be over in about 30 minutes after lunch. He said okay, and I finished my sandwich and headed towards his house in a hipster section of the city. I arrived to a large Victorian home, meticulously maintained. As I walked up to knock on the door, I could see that it was already wide open. I approached the doorway and gave it a good knocking. I heard a man from upstairs yell, "I'll be right down." As I waited I could see that the main floor was spotless and restored to perfection. It looked like it was used for art shows or something, as there was no normal home furniture. Well, after a minute he came storming down the stairs and greeted me with a big firm handshake and led me inside. When we walked into the room where the equipment was to be installed, the first thing I saw was hardcore gay porn blasting on the big screen. Leather straps, chains, all that. I just turned around and walked out, and he said "OHH whoops" and quickly shut it off. After he shut it off I went back into the room to finish the install, and he left me alone to do my thing. Again, pristine bedroom, but as I looked around there were stacks of gay porn everywhere, behind the TV, on the nightstand, in the DVD racks. Well, as I thought about it for a minute, I was like, damn. I shook his hand. When I walked in, he must have been wonky it. I got to wash my hands immediately. So I walked into the bathroom and boom, there it was. A gigantic thick black dildo, no smaller than my forearm. I should have just grabbed my sheet and left, but for whatever reason I finished the job, and nothing else of consequence really came of it.